Chapter 47-55. If there was still time, Lu Jiuyang would definitely question Pan Roa as to why she was doing this. He would even scold Hanya in disdain, humiliating her until she was covered in cuts and bruises. Unfortunately, he did not have the time. Kenshin was already in front of him. 9 resplendent golden sword beams had sealed off his surroundings, leaving him with no way to escape. He could have taken the opportunity to escape while Stacked Shadow was sneaking an attack on Kenshin. However, he had taken an extra glance at Pan Roa, causing him to miss his only chance to escape. At this moment, all he could do was use all his strength to conjure a defensive shield and brandish his battle saber to use his best skills. 9 Yang Divine Saber's 6th move, Blazing Sun burns the heavens. Lu Jiuyang roared angrily as he held the 9 Yang battle saber with both hands. His body emitted a fiery glow as he slashed out a 1,000-foot-long golden blade. He was as dazzling as the blazing sun, illuminating the entire 9 Yang Divine Palace. The terrifyingly high temperature melted all the palaces, courtyards, and bricks in 100,000 feet radius into magma. All that was left in this region was boundless flames. It was dark red in color. Boom! A quarter of an instant later, the 9 golden sword beams struck the golden blade, producing a loud explosion. The golden blade collapsed, sending out divine light fragments that scattered across the world. 3 of the 9 golden sword lights were shattered, and the remaining 6 sword lights viciously slashed at Lu Jiuyang. His divine power shield was shattered, sending out divine light fragments that filled the sky. The incomparably violent impact sent him flying backwards, smashing heavily into the dark red lava. Pwah! This time, Lu Jiuyang's injuries were even more serious. When he crawled out of the magma, blood spewed out of his nose and mouth, making him look even more wretched. His face was as white as a sheet, and the golden robes he wore had long become tattered. His divine power had been greatly depleted, causing his combat strength to plummet rapidly. He was in a terrible state. However, he did not lose his rationality, nor did he attack Ji Tianqing in anger. He glanced at the battle situation not far away and saw Pan Roa God Emperor and Stacked Shadow fighting in the night sky. The 2 figures were constantly flashing before he turned and fled. Folded Shadow was a desolate race God Emperor that he had recruited a few years ago. He was very eccentric. However, he had used many methods and spent a lot of effort to recruit Folded Shadow. Fold Shadow was a hybrid of the desolate race and the beast race, but he had offended the 2 divine temples 1,000 years ago. He was not tolerated by Tai Yu and the Pantheon of Immortality. Helplessly, Folded Shadow could only sneak into unknown lands and work with the beasts and other races to survive until now. When Lu Jiuyang recruited Folded Shadow, he had promised him that when his forces were strong enough to contend against the 2 great temples in the future, he would definitely avenge him. Lu Jiuyang had never revealed the double shadow to the outside world after taking it as his subordinate. He had always kept it as a trump card and would only use it at a critical moment. Tonight, he had no choice but to let Layered Shadow take action. Who would have thought that Kenshin would have come prepared as well? He actually had the Prajna God Emperor take action to tie down the double shadow. Now, Stacked Shadow couldn't even take care of himself and couldn't help Lu Jiuyang. He could only escape first. Whoosh! Lu Jiuyang didn't have time to treat his injuries. He suddenly unleashed his divine power and used his instant movement to pass through several layers of defensive arrays and escape into the night sky. However, Ji Tianqing was already prepared. He actually used the spacetime blade and cut off the space in front of him with a giant sword. With the space cut off, Lu Jiuyang naturally couldn't teleport. He could only go around the huge spatial crack. Taking this opportunity, Ji Tianqing chased after him. He brandished the Burial of Heaven and used all kinds of sword Dao techniques, forcing Lu Jiuyang to retreat again and again. Even though there were thousands of God King guards rushing over from all directions and bravely attacking Ji Tianqing, they weren't strong enough. Even if they attacked without any regard for their own safety, they couldn't do much damage to Ji Tianqing. On the other hand, the shock waves from Ji Tianqing and Lu Jiuyang's battle could easily injure them and even kill many guards instantly. The two fought for several minutes, passed through several layers of defensive arrays, and left Ninyang Divine Palace. Even though Lu Jiuyang had successfully escaped Ninyang Divine Palace, he was killed by Ji Tianqing because of his severe injuries when he was 100,000 miles away from Ninyang Divine Palace. Kaboom! A giant golden sword that was as bright as the sun slashed down and drowned Lu Jiuyang's figure. Lu Jiuyang, who was riddled with wounds and weakened greatly, was cut in half on the spot. He was almost powerless to resist. The divine body that had been tempered thousands of times shattered under the sword light, and blood splattered everywhere. After his head exploded, Lu Jiuyang's godhead was also shattered. 16 pieces of godhead fragments fluttered in the night sky, glowing with divine light. Not far from the battlefield, there were still more than 2,000 god race guards in the night sky tens of thousands of miles away. They were doing their best to pursue. They were loyal to Lu Jiuyang, and their leader was Lu Jiuyang's last disciple and the former commander of his guards. However, everyone saw the scene of Lu Jiuyang being killed with their own eyes. At this moment, the entire place was silent. Only the dull sound of the explosion still reverberated between heaven and earth. More than 2,000 guards were stunned. Their faces were filled with fear and disbelief. The Ninyang God Emperor, who was incomparably powerful and almost invincible in their hearts, was actually killed so easily by someone. Everyone looked at Kenshin, their eyes full of fear and reverence. A moment later, the divine light that filled the sky dissipated. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and grabbed Lu Jiuyang's godhead fragment. At this time, the 2,000 guards came back to their senses. The middle-aged god race man in the lead was called Tan Yi, and he was Lu Jiuyang's last disciple. He suppressed the shock and fear in his heart and shouted, "Quickly retreat. Where there is life, there is hope." Like all the guards, he found it hard to accept Lu Jiuyang's death and hated Kenshin to the core. But at this time, he had to maintain his rationality and absolutely could not lead the guards to continue charging. That was not to avenge his master, but to seek his own death and die in vain. What he had to do was to preserve his strength as much as possible and lead all his master's loyal subordinates to get rid of Kenshin's pursuit. They would find a place to live incognito and quietly develop and grow stronger. One day in the future, when he also became a god emperor powerhouse and his forces were strong enough, he would kill Kenshin to avenge his master. Not only Tan Yi thought so, the two middle-aged strategists and several guard commanders also thought so. Thus, everyone came back to their senses and turned around to flee. Only 100 or so of Lu Jiuyang's diehard followers were unable to accept the fact that Lu Jiuyang was killed. They were so angry that their eyes were about to burst as they roared and rushed toward Ji Tianqing. There was no need to doubt the result. After Ji Tianqing collected the spoils of war, he brandished the Heaven Burier sword and executed a few divine abilities and lost skills. More than half of the guards were killed and beaten to a pulp. Then, he rapidly teleported in the night sky to chase after Tan Yi and the guards. Chapter 47-56. Tan Yi and the two strategists could think of preserving their strength first and take revenge after strengthening their forces in the future. Ji Tianqing had come prepared, so how could he not have guessed their thoughts? Even though Tan Yi and those guards could not threaten him for the time being and might not be able to threaten him in the future. But he was used to cutting weeds and eliminating the roots, not leaving any future troubles. Naturally, he had to kill Tan Yi and the rest. Even if he could not annihilate Lu Jiuyang's old subordinates, he had to kill Tan Yi and the two strategists, as well as a few guard commanders. After dealing with these leaders, the remaining guards would be like a plate of loose sand. It would be difficult for them to become capable and not be a concern. Swish! In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianqing teleported 30,000 miles and caught up with a group of guards and two guard commanders. Without saying a word, he raised the sword of burial of heaven and slashed out a sword light. It was as if a rain of swords covered the sky and enveloped over 1,000 guards. All the guards turned pale with fright and were filled with fear. Some scattered and fled in all directions. Some used all their strength to condense a shield in a futile attempt to resist. Only to hear a series of muffled sounds and explosions. Divine light burst forth in the sky. Bloody light danced in the air. There were also many corpses and debris flying out. Ji Tianqing only used one move and instantly killed over 200 Divine King Realm guards and injured over 100 people. Including those 2 High Divine King Guard commanders, they also failed to escape this calamity and lost their lives on the spot. Ji Tianqing did not stop. He brandished the sword of burial of heaven and continued to attack. Before long, the remaining few hundred guards were also killed in a disorderly manner. Blood rain filled the sky. Only a few people escaped with their lives. In order not to waste time, Ji Tianqing did not chase after those few guards who escaped. He continued to fly in the direction of Ninyang Divine Palace. He chased after Tan Yi and the 2 strategists, as well as over 1,000 guards. Tan Yi and the rest had already fled long ago. When they saw Ji Tianqing slaughtering those guards, they were scared out of their wits and were filled with fear. When escaping, everyone gave it their all. They even did not hesitate to use all kinds of forbidden techniques and divine abilities. However, these people were still unlucky in the end. Hanya God Emperor and Stacked Shadow fought hundreds of moves in Ninyang Divine Palace. They were evenly matched. No one could defeat the other. Considering that there were many guards inside and outside the Divine Palace and that there would be an endless stream of reinforcements, Hanya God Emperor could only rush out of Ninyang Divine Palace and chase after Ji Tianqing and Lu Jiuyang. Overlapping Shadow didn't hesitate and chased after Pan Ruo God Emperor to the east. However, after flying for tens of thousands of miles, they discovered with their spiritual awareness that Lu Jiuyang had been killed by Ji Tianqing. At that time, Hanya God's spirit. Stacked Shadow's body stiffened and he lost all confidence. He no longer bothered with Pan Ruo God Emperor and turned to flee. Although he had reached an agreement with Lu Jiuyang to secretly join the Ninyang Divine Palace. But he had only followed Lu Jiuyang for a few years. He was not that loyal, and it was impossible for him to sell his life for the other party. Since Lu Jiuyang was already killed, his agreement with Lu Jiuyang was naturally cancelled. He would definitely not avenge Lu Jiuyang and risk his life against Hanya and Ji Tianqing. Stacked Shadow was good at concealment and assassination. His escape methods were also very brilliant. He hid in the darkness and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Hanya God Emperor chased for a while. Seeing that Stacked Shadow had escaped far away, she gave up the chase. She was planning to meet up with Ji Tianqing when she ran into Tan Yi and the guards who were fleeing in panic. The result could be imagined. Hanya did not hesitate to brandish her divine sword and started to kill Tan Yi and the guards. The gloomy night sky was immediately filled with dazzling divine light. All kinds of blade lights and sword shadows collided in the air, exploding into countless fragments of divine light. Broken corpses fell from the night sky one after another, accompanied by fragments of divine light. Mournful screams and painful howls also reverberated in the air. Hanya God Emperor was unstoppable. With an unparalleled posture, she wantonly slaughtered those guards. Tan Yi and the 2 strategists were the smartest. They instigated the guards to besiege Hanya while they took the opportunity to escape. But how could their schemes and actions be hidden from Hanya? Hanya immediately changed her target and went all out to intercept Tan Yi and the 2 strategists. The powerful divine might of a God Emperor enveloped Tan Yi and the 2 strategists, making it difficult for them to move as if they were trapped in a quagmire. In less than 20 breaths of time, Hanya God Emperor killed more than 100 guards and 2 strategists. Only Tan Yi was left alive, but his eyes were also full of panic as he fled in panic. At this time, Ji Tianqing finally arrived. As early as tens of thousands of miles away, his divine sense had already locked onto Tan Yi. After rushing into the battlefield, he naturally went straight to Tan Yi. Swish. 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 Another series of Sword Dao divine abilities were unleashed. Sword light filled the sky, enveloping Tan Yi and the dozens of guards beside him. Following a burst of muffled sounds, Tan Yi was minced into pieces by the sword light on the spot. Even the guards beside him were also blasted into dregs, dying without an intact corpse. After dealing with these core figures, Ji Tianqing and Hanya God Emperor joined hands to kill the remaining guards. Everyone collapsed and fled in all directions. They were utterly defeated and retreated without any order. However, thousands of guards fled in different directions. There would still be some fish that escaped the net. Ji Tianqing and Hanya God Emperor chased for 15 minutes and killed more than 800 guards, but more than 100 people still escaped. Of course, if they insisted on chasing after them, they could still kill all the guards. It was just that they didn't want to waste time, so they spared the lives of those guards. The battle in the night sky ended, and the world returned to tranquility. The divine light that filled the sky receded, and the night sky returned to darkness. Ji Tianqing and Hanya gathered together. He cast a concerned look at Hanya and asked, "How's your situation? Are you injured?" Hanya God Emperor glanced at him, shook her head, and said, "I'm fine." Seeing that she was indeed not injured, Ji Tianqing was relieved and asked again, "Let's go and take a look at Ninyang Divine Palace. Let's see how much resources and wealth Lu Jiuyang has plundered these years." It just so happened that he didn't have many cultivation resources on hand. Now that he had killed Lu Jiuyang, he naturally had to loot the treasury and plunder the wealth and resources. Hanya God Emperor shook her head again and said, "I'm not interested. You go by yourself." Since she didn't want to go, Ji Tianqing also didn't force her. He opened the entrance of Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and let her return to the distorted spacetime to cultivate. Ji Tianqing returned to Ninyang Divine Palace alone to plunder the spoils of war. At that moment, Ninyang Divine Palace had long fallen into chaos. There were ruins everywhere, with broken walls and billowing dust. 80% of the palaces and buildings had been destroyed. The Divine Guard's main forces had also been wiped out. Even though there were still more than 10,000 living beings in Ninyang Divine Palace, they had long fled. Most of the living beings were from the beast race, with a small number of desolate race and other races. They had pledged allegiance to Ninyang Divine Palace for various reasons. They had only been loyal to Lu Jiuyang for more than 10 years, so it was impossible for them to be too loyal. Therefore, after the battle, many people had secretly fled. When Ji Tianqing returned to the sky above the ruins, there were only about 2,000 living beings left in Ninyang Divine Palace. Furthermore, there were many people plundering the treasures, preparing to flee with the treasures. Chapter 47-57. The alien lifeform's thoughts were simple. Ninyang Divine Palace had only been established recently, and its foundation was not yet stable. If it suddenly encountered a disaster, it would most likely be heavily damaged or destroyed. Since that was the case, they might as well take the opportunity to sweep away the treasures. While leaving the danger, they could also prepare for the future. However, they neglected one thing. After the Ninyang God Emperor had established this faction, he understood the importance of wealth and resources better than anyone else. Therefore, the treasury of Ninyang Divine Palace was more heavily guarded than any other place, and there were more defensive formations set up. The alien lifeforms tried all sorts of methods, but they were unable to break into Ninyang Divine Palace's treasury. Even the guards guarding the treasury had left their posts for various reasons, and some had even fled for their lives. However, the greedy alien lifeforms were still attacking the defensive formations with all their might, trying to break into the treasury and plunder all sorts of resources and treasures. Ji Tianqing looked down at the scene. After seeing this, he did not waste any words and directly released his vast divine might. Whoosh! Immediately, the divine might belonging to a celestial emperor powerhouse enveloped the entire Nine-Yang divine palace. All the lifeforms within a radius of tens of thousands of miles were startled awake. This included the alien lifeforms who were attacking the defensive formations and the treasury in a frenzy, wanting to plunder the treasures. All the living beings raised their heads and stared at the sky in astonishment, staring at Ji Tianqing. They were all stunned. They had not expected such a terrifying powerhouse to appear at this juncture. In an instant, many people understood. That unfamiliar alien powerhouse was a god emperor. Moreover, it was the god emperor who had attacked and killed the Nine-Yang god emperor. Since this god emperor had appeared, and the Nine-Yang god emperor was nowhere to be found, that meant, the Nine-Yang god emperor had been defeated. The meaning of defeat was very broad. It could mean that Lu Jiuyang had been defeated and had fled with serious injuries. It could also mean that Lu Jiuyang had been killed and had fallen. Therefore, most of the lifeforms were very smart and decisively chose to flee. Whoosh! 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 Countless beams of divine light lit up the night sky. They were like shooting stars, flying as fast as lightning into the distance. Within the span of 2 breaths, 70% of the non-humankind beings had fled. However, nearly 30% of the non-humankind beings were either unrepentant, greedy, or unaware of the severity of the situation. They were still in the Nine-Yang divine palace, and were not even willing to give up on the treasury. Ji Tianqing frowned and released a cold killing intent that once again enveloped the entire divine palace. This time, even a fool would understand that if they didn't retreat, their lives would be in danger. The God Emperor's display of divine might was only a warning. And now, the God Emperor was thoroughly enraged, clearly displaying his killing intent. If they didn't leave, there was only one outcome for them, and that was to be killed by the God Emperor. Thus, the remaining 30% of foreign beings also fled with their tails between their legs. Even if there were a few non-humankind beings who weren't afraid of death, they still remained in the Nine-Yang divine palace, unable to pose any threat to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing casually sent out a few rays of sword light, locking onto those foreign beings and insta-killing them. It wasn't that he was cruel and bloodthirsty, but that those foreign beings were deranged and had a reason for their deaths. At this point, there was no one else in the Nine-Yang divine palace. Ji Tianqing landed outside the treasury. Even he had to think of a way to break the defensive formation before he could enter the treasury. There was no doubt that the defensive formation of the treasury was composed of an emperor-grade divine formation and many supreme-grade divine formations. Ji Tianqing spent 2 hours to break the emperor-grade defensive formation. After that, he didn't need to waste too much time and energy to break the supreme-grade divine formations. 4 hours later, Ji Tianqing successfully entered the Nine-Yang divine palace's treasury. Most of the guards guarding the treasury had fled without a trace, their whereabouts unknown. Even if there were a few guards left, they were no match for Ji Tianqing and were instantly annihilated. Next, it was time for Ji Tianqing to collect the spoils of war and count his gains. The treasury hidden deep underground was, in fact, an alternate dimension. All kinds of cultivation resources, treasures, and materials were piled up like mountains in the treasury, forming mountain ranges. Ji Tianqing didn't stand on ceremony and put all of them into his spatial ring. Of course, while collecting all kinds of cultivation resources and treasures, he didn't forget to count the value of the various resources and treasures. This process took him a total of 6 hours. 6 hours later, he left the treasury of Nine-Yang divine palace and flew into the distant night sky. This time, his attack on Phoenix Ridge and Nine-Yang divine palace could be said to have reaped great rewards. Not only did he kill his old enemy, the Nine-Yang god emperor, taking revenge, but he also collected hundreds of trillions of cultivation resources. This was despite the fact that the Nine-Yang god emperor had only ruled this region for a dozen or so years. But in the past dozen or so years, he had been constantly attacking cities and conquering various tribes and factions. Every time he conquered and won, he would obtain vast amounts of cultivation resources and treasures. Those hundreds of trillions of cultivation resources and treasures could be said to be the accumulation of the 9 young god emperor over the past dozen or so years. Originally, the 9 young god emperor had hoped to use those cultivation resources and treasures to expand his forces. But he didn't expect that in the end, before he could fulfill his wish, he would be killed by Ji Tianqing. After leaving the 9 young divine palace's territory, Ji Tianqing returned to the god-slaying battleship and flew east. The plan he had previously devised had not changed. He was still going to pass through the unknown lands and rush to the Pantheon of Immortality's territory to find the god of the underworld. At this point, he had already killed 3 of his old enemies, the 5 god emperors. Excluding the Prajna god emperor, his only enemy left was the god of the underworld. When he was able to kill the netherworld divine emperor, he would be able to take his revenge and wipe out his hatred. But this matter was definitely not that simple, and he had long been mentally prepared. After leaving the unknown lands, even if he entered the Pantheon of Immortality's territory, he had to be careful. A few hours later, the god-slaying battleship was far away from the 9 young divine palace. At this time, the battleship had already been replaced by the White Dragon. Ji Tianqing had already returned to the distorted spacetime to count the spoils of war. The cultivation resources and treasures he had plundered from the 9 young divine palace were just some supplementary items. In fact, his greatest gain this time was Lu Jiuyang's divine spark fragment, Lu Jiuyang's spatial ring, and the emperor-grade divine artifact he had left behind. After Lu Jiuyang was killed, his spatial ring became an ownerless item, and Ji Tianqing could open it at will. He spent a few hours looking through Lu Jiuyang's spatial ring. The results were just as he had expected. The treasures and cultivation resources that Lu Jiuyang valued the most were indeed hidden in the spatial ring. The resources and treasures he had plundered from the treasury were only worth a few hundred trillion. And the cultivation resources and treasures hidden in Lu Jiuyang's spatial ring were worth more than 500 trillion. Chapter 47-58. The cultivation resources and wealth that Ji Tianqing had accumulated in the past were only enough for his subordinates to use for another 200 to 300 years. Now that he had obtained Lu Jiuyang's life savings and the wealth that he had painstakingly plundered, he could double the time. In the short term, Ji Tianqing did not have to worry about cultivation resources for the time being. He took out 2 more spoils of war and examined them carefully. One was Lu Jiuyang's battle saber, a true emperor-level divine weapon that had not been damaged in the battle. After Lu Jiuyang's death, this battle saber had become an ownerless item. Ji Tianqing temporarily kept it for future distribution. The battle saber also had an internal space. It was like a small world that could accommodate hundreds of billions of living beings. When Lu Jiuyang first came to the planet of origin, he had brought 50,000 elite soldiers with him. After ruling the unknown lands and establishing the 9 young divine palace, Lu Jiuyang had selected 10,000 elites to serve as the palace's guards and carry out orders and missions. The remaining 40,000 soldiers were all left in the internal world of the divine saber to peacefully reproduce and cultivate. After Ji Tianqing obtained the 9 young battle saber, the 40,000 soldiers in the internal world were still unaware of the changes in the outside world. They also did not know that Lu Jiuyang had been killed. Just like Dao Xingyun's situation, after Dao Xingyun was killed, the soldiers under his command were also unaware. Ji Tianqing temporarily ignored the 40,000 soldiers in the 9 young battle saber. He would deal with them when the time was right in the future. After all, he had used a few days to refine the 9 young battle saber. As long as he did not take the initiative to open the internal world of the battle saber, the 40,000 soldiers would not be able to come out. The second spoil of war was Lu Jiuyang's divine warship. This was also Lu Jiuyang's natal divine weapon. It was also an emperor-level divine weapon. Ji Tianqing already had the god-slaying battleship. Therefore, after killing Dao Xingyun and Lu Jiuyang, he had obtained 2 emperor-level battleships but had no use for them. He decided to spend a few decades repairing and modifying the 2 battleships to improve the quality and power of the battleships. After the 2 battleships were modified, he would give them to Yun Yao and Ji Ku. If he had time in the future, he would reforge Lu Jiuyang and Dao Xingyun's weapons and modify them to suit Yun Yao and Ji Ku. After all, those spoils of war were all emperor-level divine artifacts. It would be a waste to break them down into refining materials. He could only modify them and continue to use them. Ji Tianqing then started to refine Lu Jiuyang's godhead fragments. Among the many spoils of war, this was the most important one. White Dragon steered the god-slaying battleship toward the east at a leisurely pace. However, after flying east for 8 days, he received an order from his master. So, he controlled the god-slaughter battleship to hide in a desolate and dangerous mountain range, and he went underground to lay dormant. In this region, there were no desolate race, beast race, or other races in a radius of millions of miles. The deity-slaying battleship was hiding here to rest and reorganize. There was no need to be afraid of being discovered or disturbed. Time passed silently. In the unknown lands and the Pantheon of Immortality's territory, there were undercurrents surging. Unknown changes were happening. The 3 beast race territorial lords were still guarding the borders of the unknown lands with their 10,000 beast race elites. They had made up their minds. As long as nothing unexpected happened, they would not leave the unknown lands. On the other side, the 6 Hall Masters of the Taiyu Shrine had already entered the Pantheon of Immortality's territory with their battleships. In order to expand their search area and increase their search efficiency, they had split into 2 fleets. One was led by the 1st Hall Master, while the other was led by the 2nd Hall Master. Both fleets concealed their tracks and auras. They searched the Pantheon of Immortality's territory for information regarding Ji Tianqing. The results were indisputable. They had exhausted all their means and methods, and spent 2 months, but they were unable to obtain any useful information. At the same time, the Pantheon of Immortality's 1st Hall Master led thousands of elite godly kings and rushed to the western region. Under his orders, the various Hall Masters gathered a large number of elite soldiers and rushed to the western border to be on standby. The battle at the border had ended long ago. The god of the underworld and the 4 Hall Masters had retreated to a safe area and rested for 2 months. Most of the soldiers' injuries had stabilized, and their combat strength had recovered greatly. Now, the immortal God Emperor had arrived with reinforcements. They could regroup and fight the Taiyu Shrine's fleet again. However, they searched the entire border but could not find the Taiyu Shrine's fleet. The 6 Hall Masters had disappeared without a trace. This made the immortal God Emperor very angry. He cursed the Taiyu Shrine's Hall Masters from head to toe. He had mobilized tens of thousands of elite soldiers and gathered them from the various branches to the western border in order to fight a great battle against the Universe Temple. However, the Taiyu Shrine's Hall Masters had slipped away and disappeared without a trace. What was this? The immortal God Emperor naturally knew that the Taiyu Shrine's Hall Masters had come with ill intentions. They would not let this matter rest. Even if the 6 warships had disappeared, they would not have retreated to an unknown place and returned to the Taiyu Shrine. There was a 95% chance that they had infiltrated the Pantheon of Immortality's territory. This thought infuriated the immortal God Emperor and filled his heart with worry. The Taiyu Shrine has turned out in full force. If they had come to fight us, then I would have had a chance to deal with them. In my territory, I could have gathered thousands of soldiers and fought them to the end. However, they have snuck into my territory and disappeared without a trace. They must be plotting something. Even if they did not resort to any tricks, killing and looting everywhere, they could have caused chaos in my hall and made the people panic. However, they can come and go like ghosts and escape as they please. It is not easy for me to catch them. Alas! The immortal god emperor's heart clenched at the thought that the Taiyu Shrine's Hall Masters could bring great disaster and turmoil to the pantheon of immortality. However, since things had developed to this point, he had no choice but to passively respond and act according to the circumstances. He first ordered the various halls to tighten their defenses and increase their patrols and vigilance. Once there was an abnormal situation, they were to report it immediately. Then, he ordered the hall masters to lead thousands of elite god kings to the various halls to search for the Taiyu Shrine's fleet. Once they found traces of the fleet, they were not to alert the enemy. They only needed to report the information. As long as the 6 hall masters of the Taiyu Shrine dared to break up and cause trouble in the pantheon of immortality's territory, the immortal god emperor was confident that he could annihilate them one by one. Thus, the powerhouses of the 2 halls began to secretly compete with each other. The pantheon of immortality seemed calm at the moment, but in reality, there were already undercurrents surging. A storm was brewing. This was especially true for the dozen or so halls in the west. They could feel the stifling atmosphere before a great battle. Many hall masters and powerhouses had guessed that a great battle would break out soon. Chapter 47-59. The god-slaying battleship lay dormant in the southeast of the unknown lands for 3 whole months. 3 months later, the pantheon of immortality was surging with undercurrents. A great battle was imminent. Ji Tianqing had been in seclusion for more than 12 years in the distorted spacetime of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. During these 12 years, he first refined Lu Jiuyang's Godhead fragment. After that, not only did he obtain a huge amount of divine power, but he also absorbed more than 100 types of divine Tao nomological laws and Lu Jiuyang's divine soul memories. Ji Tianqing's strength naturally increased. The number of divine Tao nomological laws he grasped was also getting closer and closer to 3,000. He was looking forward to the day when he condensed 3,000 great Taos. After finishing his cultivation, he also refined and modified Dao Xingyun and Lu Jiuyang's divine battleships. The power and quality of the 2 divine battleships increased. Then, he handed them to Yunyao and Ji Ku. Yunyao and Ji Ku had been following him all this time. They were either in the distorted spacetime or in the god-slaying battleship. They basically did not need the divine battleships. However, there was no harm in being prepared. He prepared 2 divine battleships for the 2 of them. They could be used as weapons at critical moments. After settling the matter of the 2 divine battleships, Ji Tianqing took out Lu Jiuyang and Dao Xingyun's natal divine weapons and modified them. He used the 2 divine weapons as a foundation and added a large number of top-notch materials to reforge the 2 divine weapons. In the end, he refined the 2 divine weapons into a divine spear and a divine sword. He gave them to Yunyao and Ji Ku respectively. The power of these 2 divine weapons had increased. They could greatly increase Yunyao and Ji Ku's combat power. By the time Ji Tianqing finished all these things, 12 years had already passed. He then ordered White Dragon to control the god-slaying battleship and rush to the pantheon of immortality. White Dragon had cultivated in the distorted spacetime for 12 years. His strength had increased again. His chances of breaking through to the God Emperor realm were getting higher. After receiving the order, he quickly controlled the god-slaying battleship and left the depths of the underground, heading straight east. Ji Tianqing and White Dragon both thought that since the incident had happened 3 months ago, the news must have died down by now. The hall masters of the Taiyu Shrine either fought with the pantheon of immortality or returned to the Taiyu Shrine empty-handed. However, this was only a conjecture between the master and disciple. There was no way to confirm it, so they still had to be careful. When White Dragon steered the god-slaying battleship, he still concealed his tracks and aura. He was extremely cautious. Half a month later, the god-slaying battleship passed through the unknown lands and successfully entered the territory of the Pantheon of Immortality. Of course, in front of them was the southern region of the Pantheon of Immortality, which was not far from the southern border. Just as Ji Tianqing expected, the Pantheon of Immortality and the experts of the Taiyu Shrine would never have imagined that he would enter the Pantheon of Immortality from here. No matter how many experts the two shrines had, how many defense lines they set up, and how many scouts and spies they arranged, it was impossible for them to monitor this place. The god-slaying battleship shuttled through the southern region of the Pantheon of Immortality as if it was entering uninhabited land. It passed through one shrine after another without being discovered by anyone. Ji Tianqing's target was the god of the underworld. In the past, the god of the underworld and the Pantheon of Immortality had not really formed an alliance. However, Ji Tianqing could predict that once the god of the underworld knew that he was coming for revenge, he would have no choice but to form an alliance with the Pantheon of Immortality to strengthen his own forces. Moreover, the god of the underworld would use flowery words and distort the truth to rope in the experts of the Pantheon of Immortality to deal with him together. Therefore, if he wanted to find the god of the underworld, he had to first find the headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality. The god-slaying battleship flew through the southern region of the Pantheon of Immortality, but it was heading north. On the way, every time they passed by a shrine, Ji Tianqing would put away the god-slaying battleship and personally go to find out more information. The leader and deputy leader of each shrine were all peak divine kings. They were the most powerful experts. With Ji Tianqing's strength and methods, he could easily sneak into the headquarters of each shrine to find out more information. He could also eavesdrop on the conversations of the leaders and deputy leaders without being discovered. Although it was a waste of time, the benefits were obvious. The god-slaying battleship flew north for half a month. After passing through 5 shrines, Ji Tianqing found the information he needed. A few months ago, after we shook off those idiots from the Taiyu Shrine, they really went straight to the Pantheon of Immortality in the east. They set up traps and ambushes at the border of the unknown lands. They wanted to wait for us to come. Unexpectedly, the 4 leaders of the Pantheon of Immortality and the god of the underworld rushed to the border of the unknown lands. The god of the underworld had long guessed that I would seek him for revenge, so he decided to strike first. However, they didn't expect that they would meet at the border of the unknown lands. Without any preparation, they fought for several hours. In the cockpit of the god-slaying battleship, Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a cold smile. He told Bai Long about the information he had gathered. Bai Long listened with great interest. He was full of anticipation as he asked, "What happened after that? What was the result of the battle? Did the leaders of the Taiyu Shrine retreat?" Ji Tianqing shook his head. He continued, "The 6 leaders of the Taiyu Shrine gathered together. Even the God Emperor of the Taiyu Shrine personally took action. How could the 4 leaders of the Pantheon of Immortality be their match? Netherworld and the 4 leaders were beaten back. They retreated to the territory of the Pantheon of Immortality and rested in one of the western branches. When the God Emperor of the immortal God Emperor received the news, he was furious. Not only did he personally lead thousands of elites to the western border to reinforce them. He also ordered dozens of branches to mobilize their elite god kings. He wanted to gather an army of 100,000 to fight the Taiyu Shrine. The result was obvious. By the time the God Emperor of the immortal God Emperor and his elite troops arrived, the leaders of the Taiyu Shrine had already disappeared without a trace. Bai Long immediately understood what he meant. He asked, "Master, you mean, the 6 leaders of the Taiyu Shrine didn't retreat? They sneaked into the territory of the Pantheon of Immortality and are still searching for us?" Ji Tianqing nodded. "That's right. The people of the Taiyu Shrine are looking for us, and we are looking for the god of the underworld. Netherworld and the God Emperor of the immortal God Emperor are searching for the people of the Taiyu Shrine. At the same time, they are also looking for us." Bai Long frowned. His expression became serious. "That means the people of both shrines are looking for us. We can't expose ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be besieged by them. Now, we can only think of a way to let them kill each other and then reap the benefits." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. This is the most ideal situation. It would be best if it could be realized. But in fact, it's very difficult to carry out this plan. We need to be patient enough to find an opportunity. Bai Long suddenly thought of something. His eyes lit up. He reminded, Master, since the God Emperor of the immortal God Emperor is rushing to the western border, doesn't that mean the headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality is empty? If we rush to the headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality and create some chaos, the God Emperor of the immortal God Emperor will definitely rush back. Chapter 4760. Actually, Ji Tianqing had already thought of the idea that White Dragon had suggested. The reason why the deity-slaying battleship kept flying north was because it was heading towards the headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality. The situation was very clear. The god of the underworld and the Pantheon of Immortality were currently active in the western region, searching for enemies everywhere. The 6 Taiyu Shrine Hall Masters were also searching for people in the western region, but they were doing it secretly. The western region's branches could become a battlefield at any time. If Ji Tianqing rushed over at this time, he would definitely be caught in the whirlpool and be besieged by enemies. No matter who won between the Taiyu Shrine and the Pantheon of Immortality, he would definitely be the first to be defeated and killed. Therefore, no matter how much he wanted to take revenge on the god of the underworld, he could only hold back for now. He needed to wait for an opportunity, for the god of the underworld to be separated from the other hall masters, or even be alone, before he could attack. Or, he could create an opportunity. If the god of the underworld was unwilling to be separated from the other hall masters, he could destroy the headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality, create chaos, and force the hall masters to rush back to the headquarters. Even if he did that, he would definitely expose his whereabouts and let the other party guess that he was the one behind it. But he had plenty of time to hide, or even set up an ambush in advance. The deity-slaying battleship maintained its stealth mode, hiding its divine power and aura as it flew north. On the way, White Dragon remained vigilant and alert, while Ji Tianqing was still in seclusion training in the distorted spacetime. The headquarters of the Pantheon of Immortality was located in the central region of the territory, on the Autumn Wind Ridge, known as the Immortal Shrine. Ji Tianqing had already found out that there were more than 10,000 people living in the Immortal Shrine. 90% of them were from the Desolate race, and some of them were from other races. Among them, there were 6,000 guards, all of whom were at the Godly King realm. The other 4,000 servants were at the Godly Lord realm. The commander of the thousands of guards was a peak divine king. There were 2 other generals who were also peak divine kings. Other than the god of the underworld and the temple masters, there were no other god emperor level powerhouses. Therefore, if Ji Tianqing wanted to infiltrate the indestructible celestial palace, those guards and commanders wouldn't be able to pose a threat to him. It was estimated that only the emperor-level defensive array of the divine palace could cause him some trouble. As time passed, the god-slaying battleship got closer and closer to the immortal palace. At this time, the situation in the western region of the Pantheon of Immortality had become increasingly tense. Just last night, the god of the underworld and 2 hall masters led thousands of elite divine kings to patrol the territory of one of the halls. They discovered something strange. In that city, they actually discovered the divine energy fluctuations and aura left behind by the god emperor. What did this mean? Not long ago, perhaps even within the last 2 hours, a god emperor powerhouse had come here and cast a spell to search the entire city. This discovery made the god of the underworld and the 2 hall masters very excited. They immediately entered a state of combat readiness. What they could be sure of was that their hall masters hadn't searched this place before. Therefore, the one who left behind the divine energy fluctuations and aura in this city must be a powerhouse from the Taiyu Shrine or Kenshin. While the god of the underworld and the 2 hall masters were excited, they also began a careful and meticulous search. They could guess that the other party hadn't gone far after searching this city. It was even possible that they hadn't left the city yet. The god of the underworld was in charge of searching the interior of the city. The two hall masters were in charge of searching the outside of the city for the god emperor powerhouse. The 4,000 elite divine kings that accompanied them quickly moved out and surrounded the entire city. The result was shocking to everyone, even to the point of disbelief. More than 4,000 elite godly kings had just sealed off the entire city when there was a disturbance within the city. The god emperor powerhouse who had left behind the divine energy fluctuations had indeed not left the city. Sensing the presence of the god of the underworld and the two hall masters, as well as the movements of the several thousand elite divine kings, the god emperor powerhouse hiding in the city had no choice but to quietly leave the city. The other party didn't want to meet the god of the underworld and the others face to face, nor did they want to fight here. But the city had already been sealed off, and the defensive formation had been activated. If they wanted to rush out of the city, they had to break the formation. Although the defensive formation of the city wasn't of a very high grade, only a supreme grade king-level divine formation. For a powerhouse like the God Emperor, breaking such a formation wasn't difficult at all. But when the other party broke through the defensive formation, there was an even more intense divine energy fluctuation, and it caused a certain amount of commotion. The god of the underworld sensed it and immediately rushed over to investigate. The other party was anxious and no longer concealed himself. He directly used a secret technique and forcefully broke through the defensive formation. Boom! Crack! Following an earth-shattering explosion, a huge hole was blasted open in the defensive array. Fragments of divine light filled the sky, and the protective shield within a radius of dozens of miles shook violently. The civilians in the city, as well as the elite divine kings who had sealed off the city, were all given a fright. Whoosh! Then, a dazzling beam of divine light shot out of the hole in the formation like an arrow and fled the city. Whoosh! The golden beam of divine light streaked across the night sky like a shooting star and fled into the distance. The god of the underworld didn't hesitate at all. He also passed through the hole in the defensive formation and chased after it as quickly as possible. Although the other party was enveloped in divine light and his appearance couldn't be seen clearly, he was certain. The god of the underworld was certain that the other party had the strength of a middle-level god emperor. If the other party had several god emperors acting together, then they were most likely the hall masters of the Taiyu Shrine. But the other party was acting alone. The god of the underworld was very confident that the other party was a Kenshin. It was precisely because of this that he was so proactive, chasing after them without any regard for his own safety. The other two hall masters were taken aback. They had originally planned to search outside the city, but they didn't expect the situation to take such a sudden turn. Since the other party had exposed himself, there was no need for them to search. They hurriedly followed the god of the underworld and chased into the distance. The 4,000 elite god kings were the ones who were truly stuck between a rock and a hard place. They had just arranged their formation and sealed off the entire city when the enemy appeared on their own accord. Since the hall masters in the lead had chased after them, they should also follow. But the hall masters didn't give the order. These divine kings didn't know whether to seal off the city or chase after them. Just as the commanders were hesitating, a communication jade slip flew over. It was an order from the fourth hall master. He wanted them to abandon the city and hurry over to help. Thus, the commanders didn't dare to hesitate any longer. They hurriedly gathered the divine kings and boarded the divine ship to chase after the two hall masters. This sudden turn of events caused the commoners in the city to panic. While the god of the underworld and the two hall masters were chasing after the divine light, they didn't forget to send a message to report to the immortal god emperor. As for the divine light, it was actually the fifth hall master of the Taiyu Shrine. He, the fourth hall master, and the second hall master formed a team to search for Ji Tianqing's whereabouts in this area. In order to increase efficiency, they split into 3 groups after arriving at the hall master's branch and searched each city simultaneously. Chapter 4761. The fifth Hall Master of the Taiyu Shrine wanted to leave as soon as possible after searching the city. He also remembered the Lord Hallmaster's instructions, so he acted cautiously. He did not dare to be blatant in case he left too many traces. But he did not expect to be so unlucky. He had just used a secret technique to detect auras when he ran into the Pantheon of Immortality. Moreover, the Pantheon of Immortality was so cautious. 3 Hallmasters came with thousands of elite immortal kings. This made the fifth Hallmaster worried and anxious. At the critical moment, he could only break through the defensive formation and run for his life. After he escaped the city, he would definitely be hunted down by the Pantheon of Immortality. So, he ran to the southwest to meet up with the second Hallmaster as soon as possible. While he was running, he sent a message to the second Hallmaster and the fourth Hallmaster, asking them to come to his aid. While he was running, the fifth Hallmaster had mixed feelings. He was disappointed and depressed. Why am I so unlucky? We were all on the same mission. Why did I run into the Pantheon of Immortality and expose my whereabouts? Now, not only is my whereabouts exposed, but the second Hallmaster and the fourth Hallmaster are also involved. The Lord Hallmaster's plan is affected. He will definitely punish me. Even if he was being hunted down by the god of the underworld, the fifth Hallmaster was not worried about his own safety. He was afraid of being punished by the Lord Hallmaster. As for his own safety, he was not too worried. After all, the god of the underworld who was hunting him was only at the middle level of the god emperor, which was about the same as him. Even if the god of the underworld was chasing him with all his might, it would be difficult for him to close the distance between them. The distance between them was always about 30,000 miles. The fifth Hallmaster calculated silently. He only needed to hold on for 6 hours, and the second Hallmaster would come to his aid. The second Hallmaster was very powerful. If he joined forces with the second Hallmaster, even if the 3 Hallmasters of the Pantheon of Immortality attacked him together, he would not be afraid. While these thoughts flashed through his mind, the fifth Hallmaster did not slow down. On the other side, the god of the underworld and the 2 temple masters were also in the process of chasing with all their might. Many thoughts flashed through their minds. The first question that the 3 of them considered was, who was that guy running for his life in front of them? Which Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine? Or the Kenshin they were looking for? Of course, the god of the underworld hoped that the other party was a Kenshin. That way, he could use this opportunity to kill the other party once and for all. If the other party was a Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine, then he wouldn't be interested. As for the 2 shrine masters behind the god of the underworld, they didn't really care who they were. After all, they were enemies that they had to get rid of. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The 4 god emperors chased each other through the night sky for tens of millions of miles, and their divine power was depleted to varying degrees. At this moment it was difficult for the 5th Hallmaster, who was at the front, to maintain his disguise. His divine power aura became even more obvious. The god of the underworld, who had been following him from behind and maintaining a distance of 30,000 miles, finally used his divine sense to investigate clearly. After seeing the other party's appearance and confirming the other party's divine soul aura, the god of the underworld revealed a look of deep disappointment. He had thought that the other party was a Kenshin. He didn't expect it to be a Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine, and the one with a lower status. For a moment, the god of the underworld wanted to give up, turn around, and leave. But logic told him that he couldn't do that. If he turned around and left, it would be tantamount to declaring to the Pantheon of Immortality that he only cared about his own interests and didn't care about the Pantheon of Immortality at all. One could only imagine how the Pantheon of Immortality would treat him. He had used all his schemes and methods to form an alliance with the Pantheon of Immortality and instigated the Pantheon of Immortality to help him deal with the Kenshin. How could he give up halfway? Thus, the god of the underworld could only suppress his disappointment and continue to chase after the 5th Hallmaster. The two Hall Masters behind the god of the underworld were slightly stronger. After an hour of chasing, they had already caught up with the Netherworld Divine Emperor and were now on the same path as him. They had also used their divine senses to clearly see that the God Emperor fleeing in front of them was the Taiyu Shrine's fifth Hall Master. However, they weren't disappointed. Instead, they were even more excited and expectant. Speed up and catch up to him. We can't let that guy escape. Those bastards from the Taiyu Shrine, how dare they come to our territory and behave so atrociously? We'll make sure they don't return. The first Hall Master's strategy is too good. We can't fight the Taiyu Shrine head-on. We have to annihilate them one by one. Kill the fifth Hall Master first. It's equivalent to cutting off one of the Taiyu Shrine's fingers. If this guy can attract reinforcements, we'll kill him first, and then kill the Hall Master who comes to support him. The two Hall Masters discussed telepathically as they sped up. Their hearts were filled with anticipation. They had already reported the news to the immortal God Emperor. They believed that the immortal God Emperor would bring the other two Hall Masters and rush over as quickly as possible. In 2 days at the latest, the 6 Hall Masters of the Pantheon of Immortality would be gathered. At that time, they could kill the Hall Masters of the Taiyu Shrine one by one, or even wipe them all out. The dawn of victory was right in front of them. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. The 2 Hall Masters of the Pantheon of Immortality had caught up with the 5th Hall Master of the Taiyu Shrine. On the contrary, the somewhat pessimistic god of the underworld was at the back of the pack. He was still 40,000 miles away from them. The 2 Hall Masters of the Pantheon of Immortality had launched a siege on the 5th Hall Master. The 2 Hall Masters attacked from the left and right, using all kinds of supernatural powers and supreme techniques. The 5th Hall Master was dodging left and right, and he was in a difficult situation. After being besieged, the 5th Hall Master fought as he fled, but his speed had decreased by more than half. The two sides had only exchanged more than 30 blows, and the 5th Hall Master was already injured. Not only did his divine power shield collapse, but there were hideous wounds on his shoulders and back that kept bleeding. The 5th Hall Master was stalled and could not escape for the time being. No matter how slow the god of the underworld was, he had enough time to rush over. When he joined the battle and besieged the 5th Hall Master with the other 2 Hall Masters, the pressure on the 5th Hall Master suddenly increased, and the situation became very dangerous. The 4 people on the battlefield were all at the middle level of the God Emperor. 3 besieging 1 could imagine what the outcome would be. Only 100 breaths of time had passed, and the 2 sides had only exchanged more than 100 blows. The 5th Hall Master was severely injured and vomited blood. He was sent flying thousands of miles away. This time, he was really panicking and felt the threat of death. Although he knew that he was not far away from the 2nd Hall Master. As long as the 2nd Hall Master arrived in time, he could still survive. But he could not be sure how long it would take for the 2nd Hall Master to arrive. 15 minutes later. Or 100 breaths later. If it was more than 15 minutes, the 5th Hall Master would be in complete despair. He knew very well that he would not be able to hold on until then, and would die on the spot. Therefore, the 5th Hall Master endured his injuries and did not hesitate to use a forbidden secret technique to stimulate his last bit of potential to escape. He did not want to tangle with the god of the underworld and the others. He only wanted to escape. But the more he wanted to escape, the more he could not. He was beaten up even more badly by the 3 people of the god of the underworld, and his injuries were even more serious. Chapter 47-62. The 5th Hall Master's injuries were getting more and more severe, and his combat ability was rapidly weakening. In another 20 to 30 rounds, he would be killed by the combined forces of the god of the underworld and his 2 companions. The 5th Hall Master was filled with despair, and he thought that he was going to die. At this critical moment, a dazzling divine light lit up in the sky not far away, and it was speeding toward them like a shooting star. In just a few breaths, the divine light crossed 100,000 miles and rushed into the battlefield. The sudden arrival of the divine light carried a vast divine power, and an overwhelming and violent aura shrouded a radius of 30,000 miles. The god of the underworld and the two Hallmasters were shocked, and they subconsciously slowed down their attacks and put on a defensive and alert posture. The fifth Hallmaster, who was severely injured and on the verge of death, sensed the aura of the powerhouse, and he was ecstatic, as if he had found a life-saving straw. Second Hallmaster. You're finally here, save me. The fifth Hallmaster, who was covered in blood, his clothes were ragged, and his hair was messy. He waved his hands and let out a muffled cry. That's right, the divine light that rushed over was the second Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine, and he had the strength of an upper-level god emperor. Even Ji Tianqing was no match for this person, and he had been severely injured, and it was not easy for him to escape. The second palace master came with a menacing aura, but he did not act recklessly. After he rushed into the battlefield, he intimidated the god of the underworld and his two companions, but he was not in a hurry to attack. While the god of the underworld and his companions were on high alert and slowed down their attacks, the second Hallmaster released a divine light that filled the sky, and helped the fifth Hallmaster block most of the attacks. With his help, the fifth Hallmaster's pressure was greatly reduced, and he was in a much more stable situation. The second Hallmaster used a few more divine skills to force the god of the underworld and his companions to retreat, and then he rescued the fifth Hallmaster. He protected the fifth Hallmaster behind him, and the fifth Hallmaster had a chance to breathe. He hurriedly channeled his energy to suppress his injuries, and took a healing elixir. The god of the underworld and his companions recognized the second Hallmaster and witnessed his strength. They were instantly stressed, and they were frustrated. They knew that it was impossible for them to kill the fifth Hallmaster now that the second Hallmaster had arrived. They could only regret that they did not kill the fifth Hallmaster before the second Hallmaster arrived. The two sides were in a stalemate for a while, and the second Hallmaster asked the fifth Hallmaster if he could continue to fight. The fifth Hallmaster looked pained, and hesitated, and did not reply. Seeing his reaction, the second palace master knew that his injuries were too severe and he could no longer fight. The second Hallmaster of the underworld, and his companions, the fifth Hallmaster. Hallmaster of the underworld, fifth Hallmaster of the underworld, and his companions. Swish. Swish. Boom 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 boom. Rumble rumble rumble. The Hallmaster of the underworld, and of the god Hallwiththee of the Hallmaster. Even though the second palace master was powerful enough to crush any one of the three, the second palace master was still very strong. However, the three emperor gods had joined forces to besiege him and it was still very troublesome for him. His hands and feet were tied and he couldn't unleash his full power. The second Hallmaster had dominated the land of origin for tens of thousands of years, and he only admired the god Emperor Taiyu and the legendary ancestor. He was not even afraid of the founders of the other three god palaces. Now that he was besieged by three middle-level god emperors, he was in such a passive position. Naturally, he was furious. However, he knew that this was the territory of the Pantheon of Immortality. If they were entangled for too long, the other party would attract more reinforcements. By then, he would be besieged by more god emperors and thousands of elite god kings. It would be impossible for him to escape, and he would die on the spot. Therefore, the second Hallmaster could only suppress his anger. After fighting with the god of the underworld and his companions for a while, he fled into the distance. The god of the underworld and his companions did not want to give up, and they began to chase after him. Their expectations had been lowered. Even if they knew that they could not kill the second Hallmaster, they had to find a way to injure him. The fifth Hallmaster was heavily injured and had lost his ability to fight. He would not be of any use in the short term. If the second Hallmaster was also heavily injured, the Taiyu Shrine's ability to fight would be reduced by nearly half. This was a great advantage for the Pantheon of Immortality. The two sides began to chase after each other in the night sky. They were like shooting stars streaking across the night sky, and soon disappeared into the horizon. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, an entire night had passed. By daybreak, the distance between the second Hallmaster and the god of the underworld and his companions had increased to 400,000 miles. He had successfully escaped the pursuit of the god of the underworld and his companions, and he had escaped on the divine warship. The fourth Hallmaster was also on his way to help. If the fourth Hallmaster had arrived and joined forces with the second Hallmaster, they still had a chance to deal with the god of the underworld and his companions. Even if they could not defeat the three of them, it would at least be a draw, or even a slight advantage. However, after much consideration, the second Hallmaster still felt that this was not the right thing to do. There was no need for the fourth Hallmaster to show up. They had a more important mission at hand. Their primary goal was to capture Ji Tianqing, and they could not get too involved with the Pantheon of Immortality. Just like that, the first confrontation between the two sides came to a temporary halt. The second Hallmaster sent a message to the fourth Hallmaster, and they agreed to meet somewhere. He had to regroup and bring the fourth Hallmaster and the fifth Hallmaster together. They could not split up again. Besides, he also reported the process and results of the incident to the god of the underworld. On the other side, the god of the underworld and the other two Hallmasters were not satisfied. Even though the second Hallmaster had shaken them off, they still searched the surroundings for 4 hours before giving up. After confirming that the other party had disappeared without a trace and that they could not catch up, the three of them turned back. They gathered together and reported the situation to the god of the underworld before discussing the next plan of action. The second Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine is an upper-level god of the underworld. We were able to suppress him and make him pay the price of light injuries. That's already good enough. Yes. For a powerhouse like him, it's normal that we couldn't catch up with him if he was determined to escape. No matter what, our operation was a success, and it's worth celebrating. The fifth Hallmaster of the Taiyu Shrine is temporarily disabled, and the second Hallmaster was also injured by us, exposing his whereabouts. The first Hallmaster will definitely reward us for this contribution. At least we know that the second and fifth Hallmasters of the Taiyu Shrine are in this area. As long as we send reinforcements and increase our search efforts, we will be able to find them again. The two Hallmasters were gratified and satisfied with the results of this operation, and had already asked the first Hallmaster for credit. However, the god of the underworld was not happy. He was still thinking about Kenshin. He only wanted to find Kenshin as soon as possible and use the power of the Pantheon of Immortality to eliminate him. As long as he could get rid of Kenshin, he would not hesitate to break off his relationship with the Pantheon of Immortality. As for helping the Pantheon of Immortality deal with the Taiyu Shrine, he was becoming less and less interested. In fact, to him, the two shrines were the same. If there was a need, he could cooperate with any shrine without any psychological burden. In this way, the three god of the underworld had their own thoughts. After a short discussion, they could only continue their search. Chapter 47-63. The god of the underworld and the two temple masters had severely injured the fifth temple master of the Taiyu Shrine, and also injured the second temple master of the Taiyu Shrine. The news still spread, but only among the temple masters of the Pantheon of Immortality. The temple masters who heard the news were very pleased and proud. After all, their three temple masters had made a great contribution, and they had also destroyed the prestige of the Taiyu Shrine. However, even though they were pleased, they were still worried and anxious. Even without the Pantheon of Immortality's announcement, the temple masters knew that the Taiyu Shrine's temple masters had arrived. Next, the two temples would go to war, and the temple masters of both sides would fight and kill. Once the flames of war were ignited, the people of the Pantheon of Immortality would definitely suffer the most damage. Many of the branch hall masters were silently praying that their territories would not become a battlefield. When Ji Tianqing heard the news, it was already a few days later. At this time, he had already arrived at Autumn Wind Ridge and was close to the Immortal Shrine. He knew that the Immortal Shrine was an empty city, and there was no God Emperor guarding it. But before he sneaked into the Immortal Shrine, he still patiently asked around in a nearby temple. Thus, he heard the news just now. After hearing the news, he confirmed the approximate location of the god of the underworld. He collected many clues and analyzed the results, which proved that the god of the underworld and the immortal god of the underworld should not be together. This was a good thing for him, as it could ensure that his plan could be carried out smoothly, and the success rate was very high. The night was boundless. The famous Autumn Wind Ridge was located in a mountain range with a radius of millions of miles. There were endless ancient mountain ranges, rising and falling towering peaks, as well as lush and verdant primeval forests. The divine power of heaven and earth was very rich, and it often condensed into colorful clouds between the mountains. In the beginning, there were many powerful divine beasts and ferocious beasts in this area. However, after the immortal God Emperor established his power and built his divine palace here, he gradually exterminated and dispersed these divine beasts. Now, Autumn Wind Ridge had also become a forbidden area. Without the permission of the divine palace, no one could approach without permission. Otherwise, their lives would be in danger. As Ji Tianqing traveled through Autumn Wind Ridge, he did encounter many defensive formations or trap-like formations. To God King powerhouses, those formations and traps were indeed troublesome to deal with. If they were careless, it would indeed be life-threatening. However, Ji Tianqing shuttled through them as if he was walking on flat ground. Deep into the night, everything was silent, and the night sky was dark and moonless. Ji Tianqing arrived near the imperishable celestial palace and hid in the clouds, silently observing the entire palace. Not far below, at the peak of the mountain range, there were 3 giant peaks that were thousands of feet tall. The peak of the mountain had been flattened, turning into a flat land with a radius of 20 to 30 miles. Rows of palaces and buildings stood on the flat land. Under the curtain of night, the palaces and buildings were brightly lit, illuminating the entire place. At the peak of the 3 giant peaks, there were more than 60 palaces and more than 100 buildings. It was quite spacious to accommodate more than 10,000 living beings. Although the immortal God Emperor and several hall masters were not inside the divine palace, the guards guarding the palace did not dare to be careless. However, the thousands of guards in the divine palace still did not dare to relax. They still firmly guarded the various palaces and residences, as well as the various passageways and gates. Even the various layers of defensive formations had been activated and were operating normally. Other than the God Emperor powerhouses, no one could force their way into the imperishable celestial palace. Even if the average God Emperor could break through several layers of defensive formations, they would not be able to enter the core area. After 2 hours of observation, Ji Tianqing understood the layout of the imperishable celestial palace, and also grasped the patrolling patterns of the guards. Moreover, he released his divine sense and used a secret technique to scan the entire imperishable celestial palace, making sure that there were no God Emperor powerhouses inside. At this time, he landed on the main peak in the middle and began to activate his technique to break through the formation and sneak in. With Ji Tianqing's strength and methods, even when activating the formation, he could suppress the fluctuations of his divine power to a very small degree. The patrolling guards could not detect anything unusual, nor could they imagine that someone would dare to sneak into the imperishable celestial palace at this time. Things were going smoothly. After half an hour, Ji Tianqing broke through the first layer of the defensive formation. He passed through the gap in the formation and entered the main peak, passing through a courtyard and continued forward. Soon, he reached the second layer of the defensive formation and used the same method to break through the second layer. The same method, the same process, and the same result. Ji Tianqing successfully broke through the second layer of defense and slowly approached the core area of the imperishable celestial palace. Next, he broke through the third, fourth, and fifth layers of the defensive formation. He finally entered the core area and snuck into the most sacred and majestic palace. Without the God Emperor's presence, he quickly searched through the palace's study rooms, secret rooms, and other important areas. He collected many clues, as well as some secret techniques, books, and biographies. He even found the communication jade slip between the god of the underworld and the imperishable God Emperor. But these things were not very useful. Ji Tianqing decisively went underground and opened a secret passage to find the imperishable celestial palace's treasury. On the way to the treasury, there were many guards and deity kings guarding the gates. No matter how careful Ji Tianqing was and how he managed to kill 3 groups of guards without making a sound, he still alerted the 4th group of guards. It couldn't be helped, every checkpoint was very close to the treasury, and the guards guarding the treasury were the best of the best. Since he had been discovered by the other party, Ji Tianqing simply stopped pretending and started the massacre. He easily killed the guards and rushed to the entrance of the treasury. At this time, the commotion from the 2 sides had already alerted the guards of the imperishable celestial palace. There were shadows flashing all over the imperishable celestial palace, and there were even the sounds of weapons being unsheathed. Group after group of guards quickly gathered and entered the underground passage to check out the situation inside the treasury. Ji Tianqing's response was also very simple. He focused on studying the formation on the treasury's gate and tried to break it. Yun Yao and Ji Ke protected him and blocked the passage near the treasury's gate. When the first group of guards passed through the underground passage and rushed to the treasury's gate, the 2 of them acted decisively. This was because they were invisible and had concealed their auras. Those guards could only see Ji Tianqing and did not notice their presence, so they were not on guard. Thus, Yun Yao and Ji Ke succeeded and easily killed 8 guards without causing too much commotion. Then, group after group of guards rushed into the underground passage to stop Ji Tianqing. But Yun Yao and Ji Ke used the same trick and waited for the exhausted guards to come, killing group after group of guards. However, the commotion caused by the killing became louder and louder, and the violent impact soon collapsed the underground passage, causing the palace on the surface to collapse as well. Chapter 47-64. If the commotion was too big, more guards would be awakened and swarm over. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing used his fastest speed to crack the defensive array of the treasury's entrance. He rushed into the treasury and released his divine sense to cover the entire treasury to see if there were any ambushes inside. There were many defensive arrays, traps and alarms in the treasury that was close to 10 miles in radius. There were no experts guarding it. As far as the eye could see, countless large chests were densely piled together, forming small hills one after another. There were also countless light balls floating in the dark sky. They contained all kinds of materials and some strange treasures. Ji Tianqing didn't waste time. He didn't carefully observe and estimate the value of the treasures. He directly used a capturing technique and put the small hills of boxes into his interspatial ring. While he was looting the treasures, many divine king guards passed through the collapsed palace and rushed into the rubble. However, Yun Yao and Ji Ke worked together to cast a spell and blocked all the guards, killing them one by one. The underground was too narrow and crowded. It wasn't convenient for a large-scale attack. Therefore, most of the guards stayed on the ground and formed a circle, waiting for their commander's orders. Only a small number of guards rushed into the underground and tried to stop Ji Tianqing from looting the treasury. However, they died in the ruins in the end. Soon, 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianqing put all the treasures in the underground treasury into his interspatial ring. Then, he led Yun Yao and Ji Ke through the ruins and returned to the surface. Swish, swish, swish. As soon as the 3 of them appeared in the night sky, divine light that blotted out the sky lit up in all directions. Thousands of divine light shadows poured down like a torrential flood. Ji Tianqing didn't need to look carefully. His divine sense covered the entire immortal palace and he already knew what was going on. With the collapsed palace as the center, more than 4,000 guards had already gathered in the night sky and formed two circles. Those guards were all elite divine kings. They were all wearing armor and holding swords, and they were full of killing intent. Under the command of three peak-stage divine kings, more than 4,000 guards attacked at the same time and used their most violent divine powers. Even though those guards had already verified that Ji Tianqing and his two companions were very powerful, they were still very weak. However, they had the advantage of numbers and many arrays to help them. They weren't afraid of Ji Tianqing and the other two at all. Infinite sky of chaos. The divine light shadows in the sky were about to hit Ji Tianqing and the other two. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing's body lit up with dazzling golden light. It instantly formed a light ball 100 feet wide, protecting him, Yunyao and Ji Ku. The golden light shield not only had a strong defense, it also had Taoist rhyme. The three peak divine king realm commanders sensed the existence of the Tao aura. They were shocked and their faces were filled with fear. God Emperor. He actually has the strength of a God Emperor. The three commanders couldn't help but exclaim at the same time. In the next moment, the divine light shadows in the sky hit the golden light shield and there was a loud explosion. The golden light shield didn't move at all. It only rippled with layers of golden light, but there weren't any cracks. However, the tens of thousands of divine spell lights all collapsed, turning into billions of divine light fragments that scattered in all directions. The incomparably violent force of impact wrapped around the fragments of divine light that filled the sky, forming circle after circle of ripples that covered the entire mountain peak. Boom! Most of the guards who were nearby were sent flying by the shockwave. The palaces and mansions on the mountain peak were also blasted to pieces by the shockwave, turning into ruins all over the ground. In the midst of the mess, fire rose to the sky. Ji Ku, who was wearing armor and holding a divine spear, was like a phoenix flying in the sky. He spread his wings and scattered divine fire in the sky like a storm. The palaces and mansions that had already collapsed were turned into ashes in the divine fire, leaving only scorched earth and debris on the ground. The injured divine king guards could not escape the destruction of the nirvana divine flame. Not even their corpses remained. Their bones were reduced to ashes. At the same time, Yunyao also swung her divine sword and shot out thousands of sword lights, like moonlight, in the night sky. Another few hundred God King guards were enveloped by the cold sword light. They were smashed to pieces under the moonlight. Blood splattered everywhere. Ji Tianqing also swung the Burial of Heaven sword and shot out hundreds of sword lights. Every ray of sword light pierced into a guard's head with unerring accuracy, destroying his sea of consciousness and shattering his godhead. The three of them killed almost 2,000 divine king guards in the blink of an eye. They didn't give the guards a chance to escape or hide. The guards were dumbfounded. The three peak divine king commanders were also scared out of their wits and were filled with despair. Although the battlefield was in chaos, many guards subconsciously retreated or even turned around to run. But the three commanders didn't lose their minds and still maintained a sense of propriety. They shouted loudly and ordered the guards under their command to maintain their formation. Most importantly, they took out their communication jade slips and reported what happened tonight to the immortal God Emperor and the Hall Masters. No matter what happened to them tonight, no matter if the immortal palace was destroyed or not, they had to spread the news. At least if they were killed, the immortal God Emperor and the Hall Masters could avenge them. Ji Tianqing and the other two were still slaughtering the guards who were fleeing in all directions. The three commanders had already sent out their communication jade slips and sent out the news. Although the battlefield was chaotic, Ji Tianqing's divine sense covered the entire battlefield and monitored everyone's movements. If he wanted to, he could stop the three commanders at any time and prevent them from sending out the message. But he didn't do that and tacitly allowed them to send out the message. After all, this was also part of his plan. If he didn't let the immortal God Emperor and the god of the underworld get the news, how could he wait for the rabbit to come out? The battle that followed became even more violent and violent, sweeping through the heavens and earth. Divine light soared into the sky, covering tens of thousands of miles of the night sky and illuminating the surroundings. The explosions of divine arts colliding, the painful screams of the guards, and the wails of the dying echoed endlessly between heaven and earth. The aftermath of the battle destroyed all the residences and palaces on the mountain peaks, turning them into scorched earth and ruins. On the two nearby peaks, there were still thousands of guards and servants. They could have joined the battle, but when they saw the heavy casualties and the one-sided slaughter, they were frightened and fled in all directions. After a quarter of an hour, the battle was over. The palaces and residences on the three peaks were all destroyed by Ji Tianqing and the others, turning them into ruins. Half of the tens of thousands of guards and servants were killed, and the remaining half fled in all directions like monkeys fleeing when the tree fell. The raging fire burned for 3 days and 3 nights before it was extinguished. The immortal palace was destroyed, and Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku had long since disappeared without a trace. Chapter 47-65. Of course, Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku didn't stray too far from the immortal shrine. Ji Tianqing didn't stay idle after destroying the immortal shrine. He didn't even have the time to measure the value of the resources and wealth he plundered from the treasure vault. He led Yun Yao and Ji Ku to set up one divine formation after another around the indestructible divine palace's mountain peaks and mountain ranges. For an entire month, he did not rest or stop setting up the formation. With the immortal shrine as the center, he set up more than 60 divine arrays in a radius of 1,000,000 miles. These were all emperor-level divine arrays. Most of them were used to monitor the surroundings and detect the presence and traces of the God Emperor. Only a dozen or so divine arrays could be used as traps and traps. This was the second step of Ji Tianqing's waiting for rabbits plan. The first step was to destroy the immortal shrine and spread the news to force the immortal God Emperor and the god of the underworld to return. The second step was to use the divine arrays to monitor the experts returning to the immortal shrine. Ji Tianqing had to figure out which god emperor would return to the immortal shrine before he could decide whether to act or not. If all 6 of the pantheon of immortality returned, then he could only wait for an opportunity to strike. If all the temple masters returned but the god of the underworld didn't, then he would leave the immortal shrine and go to the western region to seek revenge from the god of the underworld. After setting up all the divine arrays, Ji Tianqing finally had time to rest. He hid in a dark corner to recover his energy. During this month, 2 shocking battles occurred in the western region of the pantheon of immortality. Unsurprisingly, the 2 battles were related to the temple masters of the Taiyu Shrine. Previously, the god of the underworld and the others discovered the 5th temple master of the Taiyu Shrine and attacked him together, severely injuring him. Then, the 5th temple master ran for his life and the 2nd temple master came to rescue him. After paying the price of minor injuries, he finally escaped the pursuit of the god of the underworld and the others. But this wasn't the end of it. The immortal god emperor brought the other 2 temple masters to the area where the incident occurred and met up with the god of the underworld and the others. The 6 temple masters discussed a plan and split into 2 groups to search for the Taiyu Shrine's temple masters. The 2nd temple master of the Taiyu Shrine was quite unlucky. He had just arrived at the predetermined location and met with the 4th temple master. Before they could leave the area, they were discovered by the immortal god emperor and the others. Thus, the immortal god emperor led 2 other hall masters to pursue the 2nd and 4th hall masters of the Cosmos Sacred Hall. The 2nd temple master was very strong, but he was no match for the immortal god emperor. In the process of the pursuit, the 2nd palace master and the 4th palace master were at a disadvantage. They were injured by the immortal god emperor and the others. They fled for tens of millions of li and spent an entire day, paying a heavy price, before finally escaping the pursuit of the immortal God Emperor. But in the end, the second Temple Master was the only one who managed to escape unscathed and meet up with the immortal God Emperor and the others. The fourth Temple Master was also heavily injured and his strength greatly decreased. He wouldn't be able to participate in the battle for a while. The failure of the mission had caused the fourth Temple Master and the fifth Temple Master to be heavily injured and had to stay in the warship to recover. This was a heavy blow to the Taiyu Shrine. When the second Temple Master returned to the immortal God Emperor's side, the immortal God Emperor was furious and heartbroken. They hadn't even found Ji Tianqing, and they'd already lost 2 Temple Masters. If this continued, wouldn't the remaining Temple Masters be picked off one by the Pantheon of Immortality? They wouldn't be able to catch the Chosen One, but instead help the Pantheon of Immortality. That would be a laughingstock. After calming down, the immortal God Emperor decided to change their strategy. They still had to act in secret and search for Ji Tianqing, but they couldn't split up and let the Pantheon of Immortality pick them off one by one. The whole Masters traveled together and searched for traces of Ji Tianqing along the way. They had to be even more cautious. If they ran into the Pantheon of Immortality again, they were confident they could kill them even if 2 or 3 of them worked together, as long as the enemy didn't come out in full force. Over the next half a month, Taiyu God Emperor personally led a few palace masters to various branches in the western region to conduct a search and investigation. With the immortal God Emperor overseeing the operation, their presence and traces were completely hidden. Even the immortal God Emperor and the God of the Underworld didn't find anything after searching the area repeatedly. Not long after, the immortal God Emperor and the God of the Underworld received news from the 3 commanders. When the palace masters found out that their lair had been destroyed by a few mysterious experts and burned down, they exploded with anger on the spot. The immortal God Emperor was especially furious and almost vomited blood. This news was like a bolt from the blue. Without any hesitation, he immediately brought the 2 palace masters and rushed back to the immortal God Palace without caring about anything else. They were going to tear the murderer into pieces. The immortal shrine was his life's work, but now it had been reduced to rubble. More than half of the guards and servants he'd left behind had been killed as well. Such hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. If he didn't grind the bones of the culprits to dust, he would never be appeased. The Hall Masters knew that the immortal God Emperor would definitely rush back to the Divine Palace to take charge of the situation and take revenge after such a huge incident. However, the Taiyu Shrine's Temple Masters were still active in the western region. If they left without a care, the Taiyu Shrine's Temple Masters would take the opportunity to cause trouble. 2 Temple Masters mustered up their courage and advised the immortal God Emperor to reconsider. The immortal shrine had to send people back to take care of the situation, but 2 or 3 Temple Masters had to stay behind to keep the Taiyu Shrine in check. How could the immortal God Emperor listen to such advice? He scolded the 2 Temple Masters who advised him and insisted on returning to the immortal shrine. Thus, the Temple Masters contacted the God of the Underworld and asked him to persuade the immortal God Emperor. When the God of the Underworld heard the news of the shrine's destruction and read the description of the 3 culprits, he was so excited that he almost laughed out loud. Others might not know, but he was 100% sure that the culprits were Kenshin. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to find Kenshin, but he didn't expect Kenshin to show up and deliver himself to his doorstep. How could he not be overjoyed? If he could, he would take everyone back to the immortal God Emperor and tear Kenshin to shreds. However, the Temple Masters understood that the immortal God Emperor was angry and wanted to take all the Temple Masters back for revenge. This was irrational. In order to appease the Temple Masters and gain their trust, the God of the Underworld could only compromise. He sent a message to the immortal God Emperor stating that the culprits were Kenshin. Then, he suggested that the immortal God Emperor leave 2 Temple Masters behind to keep the Taiyu Shrine in check. He was willing to follow the immortal God Emperor back to the shrine to kill Kenshin and take revenge. Chapter 4766. The immortal God Emperor would listen to the God of the Underworld's advice. At the very least, the immortal God Emperor held him in high regard. The God of the Underworld had analyzed Kenshin's actions and the Taiyu Shrine's movements. After the immortal God Emperor received the message, he asked the Netherworld God Emperor why the Sword God would do such a thing, since he was sure that the Divine Palace was destroyed by the Sword God. The God of the Underworld explained Kenshin's actions to the immortal God Emperor through a series of flowery words. Of course, this also infuriated the immortal God Emperor, causing him to hate Kenshin to the bone. In the end, the God of the Underworld's goal was achieved. The third and fifth Hallmasters remained in the western region, responsible for keeping the Taiyu Shrine's Hallmasters in check. The immortal God Emperor brought the second Hallmaster, the fourth Hallmaster, and the Netherworld God Emperor back to the immortal God Palace as fast as they could to kill the Sword God for revenge. It would take them a long time to reach the Taiyu Shrine from where they were. It would take them at least 2 months to reach the Taiyu Shrine on a divine ship. Fortunately, there were teleportation portals set up at several of the shrine's branches on the way back. The immortal God Emperor and the 3 Hall Masters could use the teleportation grand arrays of the branch halls to save a lot of time. In the end, it only took the 4 powerhouses a dozen days to reach Autumn Wind Ridge. The immortal God Emperor and the God of the Underworld had only left for a few days when another incident occurred in the western region. The third and fifth Hallmasters stayed behind, responsible for keeping an eye on the Taiyu Shrine's Hallmasters and keeping them in check when needed. This wasn't a difficult task. After all, the Taiyu Shrine's 2 Hallmasters were heavily injured and couldn't participate in the battle for a while. The only ones who could still move and fight were Emperor God Taiyu, the second, third, and sixth Hallmasters. If the 4 God Emperors split into 2 groups and continued to operate in the western region, the 2 Hallmasters of the Pantheon of Immortality would not be afraid. What they didn't expect was that Taiyu God Emperor wouldn't split up in order to prevent the Hallmasters from being taken out one by one. He personally led the 3 Palace Masters to search the various palace halls. Unfortunately, the 3rd Hallmaster and the 5th Hallmaster of the Pantheon of Immortality met them during a search. The outcome was obvious. The 2 Palace Masters rushed forward excitedly to find out who the enemy was, only to find that there were 4 God Emperors on the other side. What was even more frightening was that 2 of the 4 God Emperors had reached the upper level of God Emperor. The 3rd Hallmaster and 5th Hallmaster were dumbfounded. Not only did they not dare capture the enemy, they even turned tail and ran. Taiyu God Emperor was calm and decisive. After confirming that there were only 2 God Emperors on the other side, he gave the order to pursue them without hesitation. 2 of his palace masters had been heavily injured by the Pantheon of Immortality, and he still held a grudge against them. Now that he had the opportunity, he was going to take revenge. The 2 sides engaged in a chase and slaughter, causing a huge commotion in the area. Taiyu God Emperor only wanted to end the battle quickly. He didn't want to waste time and wait for reinforcements to arrive. However, the 3rd Hallmaster and 5th Hallmaster were extremely cunning. They took advantage of the geographical advantage and sacrificed a large number of elite God Kings and guards to delay Taiyu God Emperor's group. The 2 sides tangled for nearly 2 days. In the end, the 3rd Hallmaster and 5th Hallmaster paid the price of heavy injuries and successfully escaped through the teleportation formation of their respective halls. No one on Taiyu God Emperor's side was injured. Only the Palace Masters had expended a large amount of divine power and were somewhat exhausted. They destroyed countless buildings and killed tens of thousands of civilians, as well as several thousand God King guards and elites. Even the headquarters of their respective halls had been reduced to rubble. After the 2 Palace Masters escaped, the Hallmaster destroyed the teleportation formation. After that, the Hallmaster fled with his guards and elites. Taiyu God Emperor's group arrived too late. They could only slaughter the guards and servants who didn't manage to escape in time and capture one of the Vice Hallmasters. Not long after, Taiyu God Emperor's group calmed down and left the hall with the captives. They returned to the warship and entered stealth mode to secretly search for the other hulls. Of course, the second hullmaster obtained some information by interrogating the captives and even refining their memories. Through the vice hullmaster's memories, the second hullmaster learned of a very important matter. It was said that something shocking had happened at Autumn Wind Ridge in the central region of the Pantheon of Immortality. Several mysterious experts of unknown identities had destroyed the Palace of Immortality and slaughtered several thousand guards and servants, causing great panic. The hullmasters of the various hulls of the Pantheon of Immortality were filled with worry and trepidation when they heard the news. The second hullmaster keenly realized where the problem lay and hurriedly reported it to Taiyu God Emperor. In a secret room on the warship, the second hullmaster had an audience with Taiyu God Emperor. First Hullmaster, the Palace of Immortality has been destroyed by 3 unknown experts. Not only were several thousand guards and servants killed, but 3 Peak God King commanders were also killed by the mysterious experts. Emperor God Taiyu blinked when he heard the news. Then, he sneered proudly. "Ha ha ha, who else could it be but that kid?" The second Hullmaster sneered. The second Palace Master was stunned for a moment and found it hard to believe. He subconsciously asked, "First Palace Master, you mean, the expert who destroyed the Immortal Palace is the person we are looking for?" "Of course." Emperor God Taiyu looked confident and said with a playful smile, "There's no one else other than him. We don't have to search everywhere, just head straight for the Palace of Immortality. The Immortal God Emperor will help us find him." The second Palace Master was still a little confused. He asked again, "But I still don't understand. Why didn't that brat hide when he entered the territory of the Immortal Temple? Why didn't he appear again after everything calmed down? Not only did he show himself, he even caused such a huge commotion, as if he was purposely trying to lure us here. Isn't that suicidal? With his intelligence and methods, there's no way he didn't think of this, right?" Taiyu God Emperor's smile didn't falter. "He's quite strong, and his intelligence and methods are top-notch as well. That's why he's very confident. He thought that he could take advantage of the chaos to lock onto his target and complete the mission. He might even be thinking of taking advantage of the situation, causing both us and the Pantheon of Immortality to suffer great losses. But he doesn't know that we and the Pantheon of Immortality aren't fighting like sandpipers and clams. He can forget about being a fisherman. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. We're that oriole." The second Hullmaster was still worried, but he didn't say anything else after seeing Taiyu God Emperor's confidence. He bowed to Taiyu God Emperor and ordered the warship to change direction and head straight for the Palace of Immortality. Chapter 4767. For Ji Tianqing, a month passed by very quickly. He had just finished setting up several dozen formations and rested for 3 days when his target appeared. During this period of time, there would be Divine King experts arriving at Autumn Wind Ridge from all directions every day. Those people were the Hull Masters, Scouts, Generals, and so on of the various branches in the vicinity. They heard the news of the indestructible Divine Palace's destruction and hurried to the scene. When they saw that the indestructible Divine Palace was indeed destroyed and only ruins were left, they all left resentfully. Ji Tianqing used the various formations in the mountain range to monitor their movements. However, he had no intention of making a move, nor did he alarm them. He allowed the Divine King realm experts to come and go as they pleased. Those people didn't notice anything out of the ordinary and didn't know that the mountain range was filled with traps and formations. Until today, Ji Tianqing was finally alarmed. The target he had been waiting for all this time had appeared. Several 100,000 miles to the west of the indestructible Divine Palace, the aura of a God Emperor expert had appeared and was rapidly moving towards the east. This meant that the God Emperor expert had been detected as soon as he entered the range of Ji Tianqing's formations. After sensing the God Emperor's aura, Ji Tianqing stopped meditating and adjusted his breathing. He focused his attention and observed the situation quietly. Although his formations could detect the God Emperor's aura, they couldn't determine his identity. Without knowing if the other party was the God Emperor of the underworld or if there were other God Emperors, Ji Tianqing wouldn't act rashly. Soon, the formation detected a second God Emperor's aura. This God Emperor's aura also flashed by, moving from west to east, heading straight for the ruins of the indestructible divine palace. 2. Ji Tianqing silently observed, this thought flashing through his mind. 100 breaths later, a third God Emperor's aura appeared, also passing by the same formation. Not only that great formation, but another great formation nearby also sensed it. 3. Ji Tianqing counted in his heart. He bided his time and continued to wait, wondering if a fourth God Emperor would appear. Judging from the current situation, 3 Hall Masters of the Pantheon of Immortality had returned. If it was only the 3 Temple Masters, and one of them was the god of the underworld, then he still had a chance to take revenge. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. After the 3 Hall Masters returned to the ruins of the indestructible deity palace, they stopped near the ruins. Ji Tianqing couldn't get close to the ruins and use his divine sense to investigate what they were doing. He could only use the formation near the ruins to detect the 3 God Emperors' whereabouts and guess their movements. Of course, he didn't need to look to know that the 3 God Emperors must be cursing and swearing at the ruins of the immortal shrine. When the 3 God Emperors calm down, only then will they discuss how to repair and rebuild the indestructible deity palace. Ji Tianqing could predict the other party's next move, but he couldn't be sure how many temple masters would return. He had to weigh the pros and cons. If he started to act now to see if the god of the underworld was among the 3 God Emperors, then he would have a high chance of exposing himself. If the god of the underworld was here, then it would be fine. But if the god of the underworld wasn't here, then he would be exposed ahead of time and the plan would fail. Furthermore, even if the god of the underworld was among the 3, he still had to kill him as soon as possible. If a 4th temple master came back while he and the god of the underworld were fighting, then his situation would be very dangerous and his revenge would be hopeless. But he couldn't delay and wait forever. If there were 1 or 2 temple masters on the way back, then it would take half a day or a day for them to arrive. Then this period of time would be his best chance. If he missed it, he might not have another chance. Because of this, Ji Tianqing had to weigh the pros and cons of whether and when he could act today. In the end, he made up his mind and decided to wait for 2 hours. At most, after 2 hours, if there were still 3 God Emperors in the ruins of the indestructible deity palace, then he would act. 2 hours wasn't a long time, it would pass very quickly. Ji Tianqing patiently waited. The 3 temple masters circled around the ruins of the indestructible deity palace a few times to check the situation. Just as Ji Tianqing had expected, in the beginning, they were all mad with anger. They kept cursing Ji Tianqing and flew into a rage. When the immortal God Emperor and the others saw that the 3 mountain peaks had been destroyed, all the palaces and residences had been reduced to rubble, and even the underground treasury had been plundered, they felt like their lungs were about to explode. After half an hour of calming down, they finally calmed down. After that, they carefully observed the extent of the damage to the indestructible deity palace and discussed how to rebuild it, estimating the difficulty, time, and resources needed. Each of the 3 God Emperors' divine ships carried over 1,000 elite divine kings. If they wanted to rebuild the indestructible deity palace, the 3 of them and the 3,000 elite divine kings could do it. However, that would take a lot of time. The immortal God Emperor still decided to send out a decree to gather all the craftsmen and experts in the surrounding temples, gathering at least 10,000 people before starting the operation. That way, the reconstruction of the indestructible deity palace could be completed within a month. The 3 God Emperors continued to discuss and supplement the specifics of the operation. 2 hours passed. Just as Ji Tianqing was about to take action, he sensed another strand of God Emperor's aura. This presence also came from the west, heading straight for the indestructible deity palace. As expected, the fourth temple master has appeared. This thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind, causing him to frown. He only needed a breath's worth of time to make a decision. I can't wait any longer, I need to act as soon as possible. Furthermore, the method of action can also be changed. He didn't need to check the vicinity of the indestructible deity palace to find out who the three god emperors were. He silently flew towards the west, approaching the fourth god emperor who was hurrying back. It wouldn't be too late to make a decision after figuring out the identity of the god emperor. Xiao. Ji Tianqing shuttled through the depths of the ground and soon arrived at the path that the fourth god monarch had to pass through. He hid himself deep underground. A few breaths later, the fourth god emperor arrived as fast as lightning, about to pass by Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing silently released his divine sense to check the appearance and presence of the god emperor. When the god emperor was only 100,000 miles away from him, he finally saw him clearly and was stunned. He didn't expect the heavens to be so kind to him, making him feel so lucky that it was a bit unreal. Because, the fourth god emperor who rushed back was wearing a black robe and a cloak, the eerie god of the underworld. Chapter 4768. Ji Tianqing was wondering if the god of the underworld was one of the three god emperors near the indestructible shrine. After waiting for 2 hours, he decided to approach the ruins of the indestructible shrine and personally investigate the identities of the three god emperors. He didn't expect that the god of the underworld would rush back at this time, and he would even encounter him on the way. This was simply like wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it by chance without any effort. In Ji Tianqing's mind, a thought immediately emerged, and it was very firm. That was, to act decisively and kill the god of the underworld. Although it was almost impossible for him to kill the god of the underworld in a single move, he would inevitably have to fight with him and cause a huge commotion. But this place was still 400,000 miles away from the ruins of the indestructible shrine, and was at the edge of the god emperor's divine senses detection. If the indestructible god emperor was among the three god emperors' divine sense, then there was a certain chance that he would sense the fluctuations of divine power, and detect the battle. Other than the indestructible god emperor, the other temple masters were all mid-level god emperor, so they wouldn't be able to detect anything unusual. If the three god emperors didn't sense anything unusual and didn't immediately rush over to help, then Ji Tianqing would have a certain amount of time to deal with the god of the underworld. This time depended on when the god of the underworld would send out a distress signal, and how long it would take for the three god emperors to arrive after receiving the signal. In just a short breath, Ji Tianqing's mind flashed through these thoughts, and he considered all the factors clearly. Thus, he decisively took out the sword of burial of heaven, erupted with all his power, and attacked the god of the underworld who was flying high in the sky. Heaven-piercing sword. Ji Tianqing was hiding in a mountain peak. The god of the underworld passed by above his head and was in the vast sea of clouds. Ji Tianqing unleashed his full power with this strike, and a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long shot up from the mountain peak into the sky, viciously stabbing towards the god of the underworld. The dazzling divine light illuminated everything within a radius of 30,000 miles. The incomparably violent sword energy pierced through the mountain peak and tore the sky apart. It locked onto the god of the underworld, causing the pressure on him to multiply and his speed to plummet. At this moment, it seemed that only the giant golden sword and the god of the underworld were left in the world. Before returning to the imperishable shrine, the god of the underworld had already considered the possibility that this was Kenshin's scheme to lure him out so that they could find an opportunity to assassinate him. Therefore, he was extremely cautious along the way, afraid that he would fall into Kenshin's ambush. Soon, he was back at the imperishable shrine. Another 400,000 miles away, and in 20 breaths' time, he would be able to see the imperishable god emperor and the two temple masters. This was already a very safe area. He believed that Kenshin would not stay here, let alone assassinate him. Therefore, the god of the underworld relaxed and let down his guard. This caused him to not be able to detect the danger ahead of time and discover Ji Tianqing's existence. As a result, when the dazzling giant golden sword came at him, he did not even have the chance to dodge or escape. The peerlessly violent sword intent was practically tearing his body to shreds. The terrifying suppressive force made him feel as if he was in a quagmire, unable to move an inch, and his speed had also decreased by more than half. At this critical moment, the only thing he could do was to use all of his divine power to form a shield to block the giant golden sword. At the same time, he took out his natal relic and placed it in front of his chest and face to protect the most vital parts of his body. Kaboom! In the next moment, the giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long slammed into the god of the underworld, causing a deafening explosion. Amidst the loud explosion, golden light flashed, and fragments flew everywhere. The violent impact rippled outwards. The god of the underworld was also sent flying by the violent impact. He tumbled backwards and crashed into a nearby mountain peak. His divine power shield was shattered, and it exploded into millions of divine light fragments. The natal relic in front of him was also sent flying by the sword light. It flew a circle in the sky before returning to his side. The god of the underworld was severely injured. A huge wound was torn open on his chest by the sword light, and blood gushed out. His face was as pale as paper, and his entire body was trembling. After tumbling for more than 1,000 miles, he finally dissolved the impact and stopped in the sky. When he saw the appearance of the person who attacked, he was stunned on the spot. He was a little dumbfounded. Kenshin. It's you. The god of the underworld couldn't be more familiar with Kenshin's appearance and divine sense. He only needed a glance to recognize Ji Tianqing's identity. He was shocked and in disbelief. He never expected that Kenshin would appear here. He was caught off guard and dealt him a fatal blow when he let his guard down. Even if the sword didn't kill him and only severely injured him, his strength would still be greatly reduced. He never expected that Kenshin's strength would grow to such a level. He was so much stronger than him. At this moment of life and death, he didn't have time to think too much. Ji Tianqing brandished the Heaven Burier sword and chased after him without a word, launching another attack. The god of the underworld could only retreat towards the immortal shrine. At the same time, he took out a communication jade slip to ask for help from the immortal god emperor. He knew that this place was still 400,000 miles away from the immortal shrine. The immortal god emperor might not be able to detect the abnormality here. For safety's sake, he still sent a message to the immortal god emperor so that he could call for reinforcements faster. Moreover, the god of the underworld wanted to save time, so the content of the message was very simple. Lord Master, 400,000 miles to the west, I've been ambushed by Kenshin. Please help. It was only a dozen words. He only needed to clearly state the situation and location. There was no superfluous words. Whoosh! The communication jade slip flew out and turned into a ray of light, quickly disappearing into the horizon. The immortal god emperor would definitely be able to receive the SOS, and he would definitely rush over to help in a very short period of time. The god of the underworld heaved a sigh of relief and calmed down a lot. However, Ji Tianqing once again appeared in front of him with his sword, thrusting out 3 dazzling golden sword lights. Each strike was dazzling and locked onto his aura, making it impossible for him to escape. Moreover, the sword intent was unparalleled and sharp, capable of destroying anything in the world. The god of the underworld's shock and fear exploded in his heart, almost taking over his entire mind. Although he was covered in a black robe, his face was covered in a cloak, and the pitch-black aura of death enveloped his entire body. No one could see his expression, and no one could see his fear and panic. However, his heart was trembling. Facing those 3 fatal sword lights, he felt a deep sense of helplessness. He could only muster up his courage and release the last of his strength to form a defensive shield and use his natal divine artifact to block in front of him. That's right. Even though he was already mentally prepared for Ji Tianqing's second attack, he still couldn't counterattack and could only continue to block. Bang bang bang. In the next moment, the three dazzling golden sword lights struck the god of the underworld, causing a series of dull explosions. Chapter 47-69. This time, the god of the underworld's injuries worsened. Even though he dodged one of the swords, he was still hit by the other two. His left arm was chopped off on the spot, the severed arm mixed with blood flew into the air and scattered across the mountains. The other sword pierced through his abdomen, leaving a bull-sized bloody hole that was constantly bleeding. After suffering such heavy injuries, the god of the underworld's strength greatly decreased, and his movements also became very slow. However, he didn't suffer any fatal injuries, and even his divine body wasn't destroyed, let alone his godhead. His strength was greatly reduced, and his combat strength was greatly weakened, so he couldn't block Ji Tianqing's attacks anymore. Since that was the case, he simply turned around and ran, disregarding everything else, as fast as he could run towards the immortal god palace. At the same time, he was praying in his heart, hoping that the immortal god emperor would quickly come to his aid after receiving the news. In fact, this was the wisest choice he could make. The immortal god emperor had indeed just received his distress jade slip, and after reading it, he was furious and was rushing towards the battlefield with the other two temple masters. However, the two places were 400,000 miles apart, so even if the immortal god emperor and the others were fast, it would still take them 20 breaths of time. And these 20 breaths of time were the deadline for Ji Tianqing to kill the god of the underworld. If he still couldn't kill the god of the underworld by then, he would be besieged by the immortal god emperor and the others, and the consequences would be unimaginable. In order to end the battle quickly, stop the god of the underworld, and kill him, Ji Tianqing didn't care about anything else. As he chased after the god of the underworld, he didn't forget to open the entrance of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower and summon the Prajna God Emperor. Whoosh! Ji Tianqing swung the Burial of Heaven, using the ultimate move of the Sword of Destruction, and slashed out a giant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long, capable of destroying everything. The giant sword locked onto the god of the underworld, and slashed down from the sky with terrifying power. A huge crack was torn open in the sky, and the space was severed. The god of the underworld was shrouded by an invisible pressure. His speed of escape decreased sharply, and his expression became even more terrified. At this time, the Prajna God Emperor appeared again. He also wielded a divine sword and attacked the god of the underworld together with Ji Tianqing. The god of the underworld was struggling desperately to break free from the world destroyer sword, but when he saw the Prajna God Emperor, he was dumbfounded. Hanya? Why are you here? The god of the underworld could still understand why Kenshin had set up an ambush here and ambushed him. Or rather, he should have guessed it long ago. However, the sudden appearance of the Prajna God Emperor was something that the god of the underworld would never have expected. A few years ago, the Prajna God Emperor had contacted him through a jade slip, saying that after being persecuted by the Kenshin, she had been hiding and wandering outside, and was building her own force. The god of the underworld had never doubted it. After all, the Prajna God Emperor was one of the 5 murderers of the Kenshin. In his opinion, Kenshin would never let go of the Prajna God Emperor. There was no possibility of reconciliation between the two. However, reality proved that he had underestimated Kenshin and the Prajna God Emperor. In the end, he was caught off guard, and the Prajna God Emperor gave him a fatal blow at this time. So this is a woman. After recognizing the Prajna God Emperor, the god of the underworld was shocked and angry. In the blink of an eye, he figured out the reason behind it. He gnashed his teeth in hatred and almost vomited blood. If time could be turned back to more than 1,000 years ago, he would never have believed in the Prajna God Emperor, and he would never have accepted her as his ally. Unfortunately, it was all too late. Kaboom! In the next moment, the Armageddon sword that could split heaven and earth struck the god of the underworld. There was a deafening sound. Under the terrifying power of the Armageddon sword, the god of the underworld's divine shield was as fragile as paper. It instantly shattered into pieces. The divine artifact that he had summoned back with great difficulty also cracked. Its divine light dimmed and it flew into the distance. Then, the god of the underworld was swallowed by the giant golden sword. His body, which was already heavily injured, was chopped into more than 20 pieces on the spot. It was mixed with blood and scattered in the sky. Among the pieces of the body in the sky, there was a 5-colored diamond-shaped crystal. It shone with bright divine light and was particularly eye-catching. That was the divine spark of the god of the underworld. It had also been damaged by the Armageddon sword and cracked, but it was not heavily injured. If this divine spark could escape, the god of the underworld would still be alive and have a chance to rise again. But at this time, the Prajna god emperor arrived. Kaboom! She waved her sword and stabbed out with an unparalleled sharp light. It accurately hit the god of the underworld's divine spark. With a dull sound, the god of the underworld's divine spark was sent flying. The surface of the divine spark flashed with divine light as dense cracks appeared on it. With the Prajna god emperor's strength, it was naturally difficult for her to kill the god of the underworld, even if he only had one divine spark left. But the Prajna god emperor's sword had destroyed the god of the underworld's defenses and severely injured his divine spark, causing him to fall into a coma. It was a great achievement. Whoosh! The cracked divine spark was still flying into the distance. Ji Tianqing chased after it with the sword of burial of heaven. In the sky 100,000 miles away, a dazzling divine light sped over like a meteor. It was the undying god emperor who had rushed over to help. His heart burned with anxiety as he flew at full speed. Even from 100,000 miles away, he used his divine sense to see the situation clearly. He discovered the Prajna god emperor and Ji Tianqing, as well as the god of the underworld whose divine spark had been damaged. Thief, how dare you! Seeing that Ji Tianqing had caught up to the god of the underworld's divine spark and was about to attack again, the undying god emperor roared in anger. Unfortunately, he was still 100,000 miles away from the god of the underworld's divine spark, while Ji Tianqing was only 10,000 miles away. No matter how fast he was, he could not stop Ji Tianqing from killing the god of the underworld. At this time, Ji Tianqing was faced with a dilemma. On one side was the god of the underworld who could be killed in 2 breaths of time. Even further away was the undying god emperor and the 2 god emperor middle-level temple masters who had rushed over to help. If he insisted on killing the god of the underworld, he would inevitably be entangled by the undying god emperor and the others. If he did not want to be in danger, he would have to give up on killing the god of the underworld and turn around to flee. Not only did Ji Tianqing understand this, but the Prajna god emperor also guessed this outcome. She was worried for him and wanted to know what choice he would make. But with the Prajna god emperor's understanding of Ji Tianqing, she guessed that Ji Tianqing would not give up. Just as expected. Ji Tianqing ignored the undying god emperor and the 2 temple masters who were rushing over and insisted on swinging his sword at the god of the underworld. Sword cleaves the 9 heavens. When he was still several thousand miles away from the god of the underworld's divine spark, he swung his sword with all his strength and unleashed a dazzling golden greatsword. Kaboom! The golden greatsword viciously struck the god of the underworld's divine spark, causing a dull explosion that reverberated through the world. The divine spark immediately shattered into a dozen fragments that scattered through the air. Chapter 47-70. In the end, the god of the underworld could not escape death, slain by Ji Tianqing's sword. At this point, the 5 god emperors who had joined forces to kill him, except for the Prajna god emperor, had all been killed by him. He had taken his revenge and settled his grudges. The hatred that had been suppressed in Ji Tianqing's heart for many years was finally released and dissipated. The Prajna God Emperor had also used his actions to prove that ever since he had formed an alliance with him, he had no other intentions. Even in the face of his former allies, the Prajna God Emperor would unwaveringly help him. Thus, the few remaining grudges between the two had also drifted away. Even the grudges and wariness in the depths of their hearts would gradually fade with the passage of time. Although the price of doing so was somewhat heavy. The undying God Emperor had already rushed to the battlefield, and the two temple lords were close behind. The three of them had locked onto Ji Tianqing. There was no need to guess what was going to happen next. But Ji Tianqing had no regrets. Even if he could go back in time, he would still make the same choice. After settling the grudges of his previous life, Ji Tianqing no longer had any worries or obsessions. If he could escape the pursuit of the undying God Emperor and the others today, he would consider how to survive in the continent of origin and pursue the mysteries of immortality. Kenshin. You dog thief, you dared to destroy my divine palace and kill my temple lord. Die. The undying God Emperor had finally arrived, and when he was still 20,000 li away from Ji Tianqing, he roared and slashed out with his sword, filling the sky with sword light. Swish swish swish. The sword light sprinkled down, enveloping Ji Tianqing's figure and sealing off the surrounding 10,000 li of space. The terrifying sword intent fiercely suppressed Ji Tianqing, leaving him with nowhere to run. Ji Tianqing's sword cultivation could be said to be unparalleled in the world, and no one could compare. Even the undying God Emperor could not compare to him. But the undying God Emperor's strength far surpassed his by several levels, and his fighting strength was even greater. At this moment, Ji Tianqing felt the threat and aura of death. The Prajna God Emperor was also within the range of the sword radiance. The pressure was immense and he could hardly protect himself. At the critical moment, neither of them hesitated or retreated. They could only unleash their full strength and cast their secret techniques to form a shield and neutralize the power of the sword light. Limitless chaos. Ji Tianqing shouted in a low voice. Golden light gushed out from his body and condensed into an oval-shaped shield to protect him. Countless sword lights slashed at him, producing a series of muffled bangs that lingered in his ears. The sword lights collapsed one after another, turning into divine light fragments that filled the sky and dissipating into the heavens and the earth. This was one of Ji Tianqing's strongest defensive divine abilities. The power of the shield was indescribable. Unfortunately, the shield was only able to withstand a few thousand sword rays before it crumbled and fell apart. Dozens of dazzling sword rays also hit Ji Tianqing, but they were also blocked by the divine armor and shattered by the sword of burial of heaven. After the sword lights dissipated, Ji Tianqing only suffered some light injuries. He looked a little disheveled and was in a sorry state, but there were no major problems. However, the Prajna God Emperor's injuries were more serious. Not only was his clothes in tatters, but he was also covered in blood with at least 20 wounds. Fortunately, she was at the edge of the sword lights. If the undying God Emperor had targeted her, she would have lost half her life even if she didn't die. Seeing the Prajna God Emperor's injuries so serious, Ji Tianqing didn't hesitate and hurriedly put her into the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, allowing her to return to the distorted spacetime to heal. At this time, the other two temple lords also arrived at the battlefield. They joined forces with the undying God Emperor and formed a battle formation to surround Ji Tianqing. The two temple lords were also unable to restrain their anger and roared with murderous intent. Kenshin. You damned bastard, it was you who destroyed our divine palace and killed our clansmen. Today, we will make you pay with your blood. Hand over your life. After roaring, the two temple lords exploded with all their strength, waving their divine weapons and taking the lead in attacking. In the past, their hatred and killing intent towards Kenshin came from the god of the underworld's embellishment and adding fuel to the fire. However, ever since Kenshin destroyed the immortal palace and slaughtered thousands of desolate race guards and servants, the few temple lords developed a true hatred for him. Swish! 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 More than 1,000 sword beams intertwined into a sword net and smashed towards Ji Tianqing, tearing the sky apart. The undying God Emperor didn't stay idle either. His left hand formed a divine seal and conjured a majestic divine power, striking out a fist beam the size of a mountain at Ji Tianqing. He waved his divine sword in his right hand and stabbed out more than 20 sword beams, locking onto Ji Tianqing's vital points. The combined attack of the three temple lords was too powerful and the attacks were too concentrated. Ji Tianqing was unable to dodge. No matter how strong his defense was, it was impossible for him to block it head-on. He would only suffer more serious injuries. Under such circumstances, he had no choice but to use his ultimate skill. Heaven and Earth Incarnation. This divine power was also born out of the celestial chaos mystic technique. However, it didn't condense a divine power shield, but merged with the heaven and earth for hundreds of thousands of miles. Swish! Seeing the sky full of sword beams descending and the mountain-sized fist shadow smashing towards Ji Tianqing, his body flashed with a white light and he instantly disappeared. He had merged with the heaven and earth in a radius of more than 300,000 miles. The three temple lords could sense his presence, but they couldn't see his body. Naturally, the sword light that filled the sky and the fist shadows that were as big as mountains also missed their target. They fiercely smashed into the empty space between the towering mountain range and the peaks. Rumble! A deafening sound exploded and reverberated between heaven and earth, spreading out for hundreds of thousands of miles. At least 30 mountains, 9 mountain ranges, and 6 canyons were reduced to ruins under the bombardment of the sword beams and fist shadows. Everything within a radius of 20,000 miles was destroyed, leaving behind only desolated ruins and flying dust. Cracks appeared on the ground, forming a wide ravine and gap that extended in all directions. Before the smoke and dust dissipated, the immortal God Emperor and the two temple lords realized that something was wrong. Their expressions changed and they all frowned. They released their divine senses to search for Ji Tianqing's figure. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any trace of Ji Tianqing even after searching a radius of 200,000 miles. The three of them were a little confused and couldn't figure out what the problem was. Strange, how did that guy disappear in a flash? Did he use some teleportation divine power to escape our encirclement? No matter what kind of teleportation divine power he used, it's impossible to teleport 200,000 miles away. He didn't escape 200,000 miles away. He's still in our vicinity and we can still detect his presence. He's everywhere. This is even more puzzling. His presence is right next to us, but he's nowhere to be found. Why can't we find him? The three temple lords looked at each other and discussed with their divine senses, trying to come up with a solution. Unfortunately, they were unable to figure out how Ji Tianqing had disappeared. Naturally, they were unable to find a way to solve the problem. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's presence that filled the world suddenly dissipated. He borrowed the power of heaven and earth to appear in a mountain range 300,000 miles away, using this method to complete a long-distance teleportation. Chapter 47-71. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianqing appeared at the peak of a mountain. He didn't need to look back to know that the immortal God Emperor and the two Hall Masters were still in a daze. There wasn't much time left for him, and he didn't have the time to say any harsh words. Escaping was the best choice. He turned into a meteor and streaked across the sky, fleeing north as fast as he could. That's right, the only place he could escape to now was the north. The immortal God Emperor and the two Hall Masters were in the east. If he went west, he might encounter other Hall Masters or the experts of the Taiyu Shrine. If he went south, he would have to pass through half of the Pantheon of Immortality's territory, enter the unknown land, and return to the area ruled by the 9-Yang God Emperor. Only by escaping north could he reach the Chaos Sea. Ji Tianqing had been on the planet of origin for almost 20 years. However, in these 20 years, he had no time to develop his forces, nor did he have any backers or helpers. The beasts in the unknown land in the far west were willing to help him, but unfortunately, they were too far away. Other than that, only the 2 sea beast overlords in the Chaos Sea, those 2 ancient creatures, could help him. Swoosh! The meteor streaked across the sky and quickly disappeared. At this time, the immortal God Emperor also led the 2 Hall Masters and chased north without caring about their own safety. Although Ji Tianqing used his ultimate skill of transforming into heaven and earth to teleport 300,000 miles away. However, the immortal God Emperor and the 2 Hall Masters' divine senses were more than 300,000 miles away. When they expanded their divine senses to the limit and explored a radius of more than 300,000 miles, they naturally discovered Ji Tianqing. Even if they couldn't understand what method Ji Tianqing used to teleport 300,000 miles away. However, now was not the time to think about these questions. They could only chase after him as fast as they could. The 2 sides started a chase high in the sky. The 2 Hall Masters' flying speed was about the same as Ji Tianqing's. They couldn't pull away in a short period of time. However, the immortal God Emperor was stronger, and his speed was slightly faster than Ji Tianqing's. As time passed, the distance between him and Ji Tianqing was slowly closing. Ji Tianqing didn't hesitate either. In order to get rid of them as soon as possible, he decisively performed the "so close, yet so far" skill. Swish! With a flash of white light, he disappeared from the sky. In the next instant, he appeared 150,000 miles away. The distance between him and the undying God Emperor immediately increased to 420,000 kilometers. Even though the immortal God Emperor's divine sense was very powerful, this distance was the limit of what he could detect. He could only vaguely sense Ji Tianqing's aura. Damn it! That guy just teleported 300,000 miles. How long has it been? How did he teleport another 100,000 miles? The immortal God Emperor was both furious and shocked, unable to accept this fact. He couldn't understand. With his strength, how could he have such a method? In the past, he still believed in the god of the underworld's words. He thought that Kenshin was here for revenge and had nothing to do with the chosen one. But now, he began to doubt the god of the underworld's words and re-evaluated Kenshin. As an upper god emperor, he had condensed 7 Taoist rhymes and was very strong. However, he couldn't teleport twice in a quarter of an hour like Ji Tianqing. He couldn't help but think that there was something wrong with Kenshin. No matter what, he couldn't let him escape. He had to capture him. Thus, he didn't hesitate to use his teleportation ability and speed up his chase. Swish! Another flash of white light appeared in the sky. The immortal God Emperor's figure also disappeared. In the next instant, he also traversed 180,000 kilometers of space and appeared in another sky. The distance between him and Ji Tianqing shrunk to 200,000 miles. His divine sense was still covering the other party. The other 2 temple lords were a bit anxious after being shaken off. They hurriedly used their teleportation ability to give chase. It was a pity that their teleportation divine ability could only teleport them for about 100,000 miles. The effect was not great. No matter what, they couldn't give up. They had to follow the immortal God Emperor and kill Kenshin. Another quarter of an hour passed. The distance between the immortal God Emperor and Ji Tianqing had shrunk to around 200,000 miles. At this time, Ji Tianqing had already calmed down his divine power and aura. He used the "so close, yet worlds apart" ability again. With another flash of white light, he crossed another 150,000 miles and pulled away from the immortal God Emperor. The immortal God Emperor was even more depressed. His divine sense locked onto Ji Tianqing 350,000 miles away. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. First of all, he couldn't use teleportation anymore. It would take him at least an hour to do so. But Kenshin did it. He could teleport every quarter of an hour. What kind of concept was that? As far as he knew, none of the 20 or so God-Emperor powerhouses of the four temples could do it. This made the immortal God-Emperor even more certain that the God-Emperor of the underworld was lying. Kenshin was different from the other God-Emperors. He was extremely talented and had many tricks up his sleeve. He was definitely not an ordinary God-Emperor. If the Chosen One had appeared long ago, then it had to be Kenshin. Apart from this guy, there was no one else who fit the criteria of being the Chosen One. With this in mind, the immortal God-Emperor hurriedly took out a transmission jade slip and sent a message to the other two temple lords. He had them rush to the northern region and join forces to intercept Kenshin. The two temple lords had stayed behind to guard the western region. They had been surrounded by several temple lords of the Taiyu Shrine and had almost lost their lives. They had paid the price of heavy injuries and even sacrificed the headquarters of one of their temples to escape by a fluke. The two temple lords had hidden themselves somewhere safe and were currently in seclusion to heal their wounds. When they suddenly received the immortal God-Emperor's transmission jade slip, they found out that the God-Emperor of the underworld had been killed. Kenshin was fleeing, and the first temple lord and the others were pursuing him. The two temple lords were shocked and incredulous. They hadn't expected Kenshin to be so sinister and cunning. He could avoid the first temple lord and the others and kill the God-Emperor of the underworld on his own. With their current heavily injured state, even if they ran into Kenshin, they might not necessarily be his match. They might even be killed. Logically speaking, they didn't want to stop and kill Kenshin. But the immortal God-Emperor had given the order, and they could only obey. They reluctantly ended their recuperation and drove the divine warship north. In addition to summoning the two temple lords who had stayed behind to guard the western region, the immortal God-Emperor also ordered the experts of the various temples in the northern region to be summoned. He had the temple lords of the various temples personally lead a group of elite god kings and quickly gather at a designated location. They formed an inescapable net to surround and capture Kenshin. Just like that, the Pantheon of Immortality's main target changed from the Taiyu Shrine to Kenshin. They also mobilized their strongest forces. Although Ji Tianqing had successfully shaken off the immortal God-Emperor and the pursuit of the three temple lords a day later, he didn't dare to stop. Even though he had exhausted a great deal of his divine power and was weakened, he still had to board the God-Slayer warship and continue fleeing north. The immortal God-Emperor had lost track of Ji Tianqing in his aura, but he didn't give up on the pursuit and continued north. Chapter 47-72. A storm was brewing in the Pantheon of Immortality's territory. Paper couldn't contain fire. News of the destruction of the Palace of Immortality and the death of the god of the underworld spread to the various temples. This was especially true for the 20 or so temples in the north. Their hallmasters summoned 2,000 elite god kings and hurried to certain regions, as if a great battle was imminent. This caused the citizens of the branch halls to be filled with fear and worry. Almost 99% of them didn't know the inside story. They only knew that the Palace of Immortality had been destroyed and a hallmaster killed. This was an earth-shattering event. Almost everyone subconsciously believed that the culprit behind all this was the Cosmos Temple. In their eyes, only the neighboring Taiyu Shrine had the strength and means to do so. As a matter of fact, the Cosmos Sacred Hall was the main reason why the situation had developed to this point. If not for the Taiyu Shrine keeping the Pantheon of Immortality in check, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Just as the Pantheon of Immortality was mobilizing all of its forces to hunt down Ji Tianqing, the Taiyu Shrine's hallmasters were about to arrive at the Palace of Immortality. They could have gone straight to the Palace of Immortality to find the immortal God Emperor and Kenshin, then find a way to capture the Kenshin. However, the Taiyu God Emperor had always been cautious and wouldn't act rashly. Before arriving at the Palace of Immortality, he sent the Hallmasters to gather information. In the end, all three of them received important information. Only then did they learn that the immortal God Emperor and the God of the Underworld had already returned to the Palace of Immortality. However, the God of the Underworld was unlucky enough to be hunted down by a mysterious expert. Now, the immortal God Emperor and the other Hall Masters were chasing after the mysterious expert with all their might towards the north. Such an important piece of news shook God Emperor Taiyu to the core. He even felt excited. The fact that Kenshin was able to accurately intercept and kill the God of the Underworld was a testament to his strength and skill. The stronger Kenshin was, the more it proved that Taiyu God Emperor's judgment was correct. That guy was the chosen one. This made Taiyu God Emperor and the others even more determined to capture Kenshin. Thus, God Emperor Taiyu decisively ordered the warships to turn around and chase north at top speed. The Temple Lords were confused and asked Taiyu God Emperor what was going on. Taiyu God Emperor explained the situation to them. The Temple Lords were excited and eager to give it a try. One of the Hall Masters had some misgivings and could not help but ask, "Great Hall Master, the Netherworld Divine Emperor has just joined the Immortal Shrine and it seems like it hasn't been long. Even if Kenshin destroyed the Palace of Immortality, the God Emperor Taiyu wouldn't have such a big reaction and come out in full force to hunt him down, right? Do you think the God of the Underworld might have noticed Kenshin's extraordinariness and believed him to be the chosen one?" Taiyu God Emperor nodded. The God Emperor Taiyu is no fool. How could he not know this? Otherwise, he wouldn't have mobilized so many people and asked all the branches in the north to gather manpower. Actually, it doesn't matter if he guesses that Kenshin is the chosen one. That's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is whether Kenshin can escape his pursuit. The Second Temple Lord frowned in thought. What if the God Emperor Taiyu catches up to Kenshin and they fight? What if the God Emperor Taiyu kills Kenshin in a fit of rage? The other palace masters nodded their heads, revealing the same worry. Taiyu God Emperor Taiyu raised an eyebrow, a playful smile on his lips. I'm worried about this as well, but, given the God Emperor Taiyu's style, he shouldn't be that reckless. As for Kenshin, if he really is the chosen one, he must have the means, strength, and opportunity to escape death. Alright, don't think too much about it. Just rest up and prepare for battle. Since the head palace master was so confident and full of confidence in the sword god, the other palace masters dispelled their worries. The God Slayer battleship sped north. In order to reach maximum speed, it didn't activate any concealment or aura concealment formations. Bai Long focused on steering the ship, vigilantly observing the surroundings. He didn't dare relax. He knew that his master's revenge had been avenged and his wish fulfilled. Now, all he needed to do was escape the pursuit of the Pantheon of Immortality and escape into the Chaos Sea. Then, he would be able to fly freely in the vast sky and swim freely in the vast sea. This was the most critical moment. No accidents could happen. Ji Tianqing wasn't in the cockpit of the ship. He was in the distorted spacetime of the Jyotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, silently cultivating and recovering his divine power. Even though he had temporarily shaken off the pursuit of the God Emperor Taiyu, he knew that the God Emperor Taiyu wouldn't let him go. However, he knew that the immortal God Emperor would not give up so easily. He was still in danger. He had to recover his divine power as soon as possible so that he could face the next encirclement. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. 5 days had passed in the outside world. The God-Slayer battleship had also crossed the territory of 2 branches and was about to enter the 3rd branch. The journey was rather peaceful. Although some Godly King Realm guards and patrols had discovered traces of the God-Slayer battleship, those Godly King Realm guards and patrols weren't strong enough. They couldn't catch up to the God-Slayer battleship. Even if they released their mystical abilities, they couldn't hurt the Godslayer battleship at all. Until the morning of the 6th day. The Godslayer battleship had just entered the territory of a branch and was flying above a green grassland. At this moment, divine light lit up on the left. It was like a 5-colored cloud that flew over. Bai Long immediately perked up and became much more vigilant. Even though it was still a little far away, he couldn't see who was in the cloud. However, at this time, almost all unknown people were enemies. Therefore, Bai Long didn't hesitate. He directly controlled the Godslayer battleship and accelerated to the right. The target of the 5-colored cloud was also very obvious. When it saw the Godslayer battleship speeding up, it actually accelerated and chased after it, as if it wanted to stop the Godslayer battleship. Both of them were flying diagonally, and the distance between them was constantly shrinking. Unless the Godslayer battleship's speed doubled, they would soon meet and cross paths. Bai Long couldn't possibly turn around and fly back just to avoid the cloud. Therefore, he could only activate the battleship's defensive barrier and activate the divine cannons, ready to fire. The 360 cannons were all accumulating terrifying power. They flickered with dazzling divine light. Bai Long also hoped that with the deterrence of these divine cannons, the people in the 5-colored cloud would know the difficulty and retreat. Unfortunately, the few hundred godly king realm experts in the 5-colored cloud clearly knew what kind of mission they were carrying and what kind of terrifying experts they were about to face. Even though the aura emitted by the divine cannons made them feel terrified and fearful, they didn't retreat at all. 10 breaths later. The 5-colored cloud and the Godslayer battleship were finally about to meet. The distance between the two was only about 20,000 kilometers. At this moment, Bai Long activated the array and decisively opened fire. Chapter 47-73. Boom! 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 A deafening sound rang out, reverberating endlessly between heaven and earth. The 360 cannons on the God-slaying battleship spewed out blinding divine light, releasing destructive power. More than 300 colorful divine power light pillars locked onto the God-slaying battleship, covering the entire sky and the clouds. In fact, the few hundred godly kings in the 5-colored clouds were also in the battleship. The owner of the battleship was the hall master of this branch. He was a peak godly king. The battleship was also a top-grade king-class battleship. Furthermore, it had been reinforced and strengthened. Its power far exceeded other battleships of the same grade. The divine light emitted from the battleship condensed into a 5-colored cloud, which was also used to conceal and prevent other people from probing. As it approached the God-slaying battleship, the battleship also activated its divine cannons. When the God-slaying battleship opened fire, the Hall Master also decisively ordered the cannons to open fire and attack the God-slaying battleship. Similarly, more than 300 colorful divine power light pillars shot towards the God-slaying battleship like a rain of arrows. As such, the two waves of divine power light pillars collided in the sky and began to bombard each other. Boom! 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 The divine power light pillars from both sides exploded at the same time, bursting into divine light fragments that covered the sky and splattered in all directions. However, in comparison, the divine power light pillars released by the king-class battleship had almost completely collapsed. On the other hand, only 40% of the divine power light pillars released by the God-slaying battleship had been shattered. There were still more than 200 light pillars that pierced the 5-colored clouds like sharp arrows. Boom! 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 The explosions reverberated in the sky. The multicolored clouds were blasted into pieces and quickly dissipated. The king-class battleship that was enveloped by the 5-colored clouds could not withstand the terrifying impact and was sent flying. Dozens of dents appeared on the battleship's surface. There were also a few wide cracks that flickered with divine light. The battleship had suffered such heavy damage, so its power naturally decreased greatly. However, the hull master managed to control the rolling battleship in time. After flying for more than 100 miles, the battleship came to a stop in the sky. In order to do this, the hull master had paid a certain price. He had expended a large amount of divine power. Without any hesitation, he hurriedly opened the cabin door of the battleship and let out an angry roar. Kill! We have to hold them back no matter what. Within the battleship, the hundreds of god kings who had been waiting for a long time also surged out of the battleship with sabers in hand. The Kenshin soldiers surged out like a tide. They brandished their weapons and charged towards the god-slaying battleship while shouting crazily. It was a pity that the God-Slayer battleship could not teleport on the planet of origin, let alone jump through space. Even if the battleship sped up, it could not compare to the hundreds of god kings who could teleport. Swish! Swish! One after another, elite god kings used teleportation and appeared around the god-slaying battleship. In a blink of an eye, 600 elite divine kings formed an encirclement, surrounding the god-slaying battleship tightly. In order to restrain the god-slaying battleship, the 600 elite god kings worked together to form a battle formation. They unleashed various divine abilities and supreme skills to surround and attack the god-slaying battleship. Thousands of rays of divine light, sword light, wind, fire, and lightning that blotted out the sky poured down like a torrential flood, bombarding the god-slaying battleship. The White Dragon did not panic in the face of danger. He manipulated the formation of the warship to strengthen the defensive shield and increase its power by 30%. Bang! 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 In the next instant, the sky full of divine light bombarded the god-slaying battleship, slamming heavily into the defensive shield. The loud, muffled sounds traveled far and could be heard from tens of thousands of miles away. The dark golden shield that enveloped the god-slaying battleship shook violently from the bombardment. It was even distorted. However, the defensive shield withstood all the attacks and did not shatter. It was still intact, but its light dimmed slightly. The White Dragon manipulated the formation and continued to replenish the defensive shield's energy. At the same time, he activated the divine cannon and fired at the elite god kings. Although the divine cannon released more than 300 beams of divine light, it was unable to cover the entire area around the battleship. However, the hundreds of elite god kings on the left and right sides of the battleship were all covered by the firepower. Boom! 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 More than 300 beams of divine light locked onto the many elite god kings and bombarded them with deafening explosions. Those God King experts could not dodge or neutralize the attacks. They could only use their own strength to block them. As a result, the defensive barriers of the vast majority of God Kings were shattered, and they were also sent flying. Most of them were heavily injured, and their bodies were covered in blood. Countless fragments of divine light mixed with fresh blood rained down from the sky. It was truly a bloodbath. However, even though these elite god kings had suffered such heavy injuries and setbacks, they were still unwilling to retreat. They continued to attack bravely. Clearly, when they were carrying out their mission, the branch hall master had given them a death order. Even if they had to sacrifice all of their lives, it would be a great contribution if they could hold back the god-slaying battleship. If they succeeded, all those who participated would receive the honor of being conferred by the temple, as well as extremely generous compensation and compensation. As the saying went, generous rewards would attract brave men. Furthermore, these elite god kings of the desolate race were hot-blooded and full of pride. At this moment, they were truly fearless. They no longer cared about life and death. Pine! 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 Regardless of whether they were injured or not, the elite god kings released their mystic arts at all costs and began attacking again. Divine technique shadows that blotted out the sky engulfed the god-slaying battleship once again. There were deafening booms and billions of divine light fragments. The god-slaying battleship's defensive shield trembled violently once again. Its light dimmed even more. If this carried on, the defensive shield would shatter after 2 or 3 more attacks. At the same time, the divine cannon needed some time to activate. The branch hall master was not an idiot. In just a few seconds, he had identified the god-slaying battleship's strengths and weaknesses. Hence, he decisively commanded the few hundred elite god kings to expand the encirclement and maintain a distance from the god-slaying battleship. Furthermore, everyone had to move around and engage in battle with the god-slaying battleship. They could not stay in the sky and assume a formation to be a live target. This move was indeed effective. Nearly 600 elite god kings expanded the encirclement and engaged in battle with the god-slaying battleship. They became extremely agile and coordinated well with each other. Even though White Dragon had adjusted his strategy and launched another 3 attacks with the divine cannon, he did not achieve much. He only managed to kill a few dozen god kings. He was anxious and did not wish to engage in battle with the god kings. He made the god-slaying battleship speed up in a bid to break through the encirclement and carve out a bloody path. Unexpectedly, after the branch hall master saw through his intentions, he led more than 200 fearless elite god kings to stand in front of the god-slaying battleship. They were willing to stop it at all costs. Boom! 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 Both sides clashed. The god-slaying battleship shattered the divine technique beams and blocked most of the divine ability attacks. There were even more than 20 god kings who were smashed to smithereens by the god-slaying battleship. However, the god-slaying battleship still failed to break through the encirclement. Chapter 47-74. No matter how powerful those few hundred godly kings were, it was impossible for them to destroy the god-slaying battleship. It was no exaggeration to say that White Dragon was invincible in controlling the god-slaying battleship. However, it was very difficult for him to break through the encirclement of the few hundred godly kings. If he continued fighting, he would only waste more time. If this dragged on, even if he could kill those few hundred godly kings, it would be meaningless. By then, the Hall Masters of the Pantheon of Immortality would rush over and surround the god-slaying battleship. They would not be able to escape even if they wanted to. In such a critical situation, White Dragon could only call for his master to resolve it. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianqing, who had just finished his seclusion, appeared in the control room of the battleship. Without needing White Dragon to report, he scanned the surroundings with his divine perception. He immediately frowned as a cold light surged out of his eyes. Without any hesitation, Ji Tianqing flew out of the god-slaying battleship and appeared in the sky. He was enveloped in a sacred golden light as he held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands. He slashed out dozens of huge golden swords at the crowd in front of the battleship. Swoosh! 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 The dozens of huge swords slashed down at the same time, erupting with destructive power that drowned the group of elite godly kings. Sensing the terrifying sword intent and the aura of death, the 100-odd godly kings were filled with fear. They were so frightened that their guts were shattered. They panicked and instinctively tried to escape, but it was too late. There was no way for them to escape. Bam! 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 A deafening sound rang out, reverberating endlessly between heaven and earth. Blood spurted out from the crowd, and countless severed limbs flew out. Miserable howls that shook the heavens and the earth resounded. One godly king expert after another was sliced into pieces by the sword light. Countless corpses were scattered everywhere. The godheads were destroyed one after another, shattering into multicolored fragments that fluttered in the air. Violent, devastating winds wrapped in 5-colored divine light exploded in the sky, creating ripples after ripples in the sky. Ji Tianqing used this move to instantly kill dozens of elite godly kings, tearing a huge gap in the enemy's encirclement. White Dragon had been controlling the god-slaying battleship, waiting for the opportunity to break through. When he saw a gap in the encirclement, he controlled the deity-slaying battleship and charged over without a care for anything else. Originally, the god-slaying battleship could have used this opportunity to break through the encirclement. However, Ji Tianqing and the White Dragon did not expect that and underestimated the determination of the Branch Hall Master. The Branch Hall Master actually did not fear death. He led over 100 elite god kings and formed a human wall in front of the battleship. There was no battle formation. They just relied on the divine light shield and their own bodies to form a sturdy barrier. Even though they knew that they would definitely die if they did so, they still did it without hesitation. Boom! The god-slaying battleship that was enveloped in divine light slammed into the group of god kings with an earth-shaking boom. Divine light burst forth and a loud noise shook the heavens. The several dozen god kings were all blown away. Their bodies were either damaged or broken, or they were covered in wounds and blood. Apart from the 30-odd god kings who were uninjured, the remaining 90-odd god kings were either killed on the spot or heavily injured. Even the Branch Hall Master, who was leading them, was heavily injured. His hair was disheveled, and his body was covered in blood. Although they had paid such a huge sacrifice, their sacrifice was meaningful. In exchange, the god-slaying battleship was blocked once again. This group of god kings stalled for another 10 seconds before rallying and forming another encirclement. They wanted to stop the god-slaying battleship at all costs. Ji Tianqing was enraged. His expression was cold as he struck out with a mountain-sized dragon-elephant fist shadow with his left hand. He waved his sword with his right hand and used a sword Dao technique. Daylight Sword. Boom! The mountain-sized dragon-elephant fist shadow struck the 20-odd elite god kings. A loud noise erupted as they were blasted into pieces. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. A cold light suddenly appeared and bloomed in the crowd. It instantly expanded into a dazzling sun that spanned thousands of miles. The 100 elite god kings blocking the god-slaying battleship were all swallowed by the daylight sword. They melted like snow in the dazzling golden sun. Even their godheads were reduced to dust. The power of this sword technique was too terrifying. None of the elite god kings that were swallowed by the daylight sword survived. Even the Branch Hall Master, who was a peak god king, was killed by the daylight sword. He was reduced to ashes and no longer existed. This time, the obstacles in front of the god-slaying battleship were cleared. No one could stop it anymore. The 100-odd elite god kings that were lucky enough to survive were all heavily injured. They no longer had the strength to fight. The Branch Hall Master was already dead. Without a leader, they were like a pile of loose sand. Their morale naturally collapsed. They could only watch helplessly as the god-slaying battleship lit up with a dazzling divine light. It streaked across the sky like a shooting star and flew away. A moment later, the god-slaying battleship disappeared into the horizon. The elite god kings that were lucky enough to survive finally regained their senses. They all looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. The joy of surviving a calamity made them forget their pain for the time being. But there were also many elite god kings who were extremely dejected. After calming down and thinking about it carefully, they felt that it was not worth it. They had paid such a terrible price, even sacrificing their Branch Hall Master, just to prove that the god-slaying battleship did indeed have someone that the Divine Hall was pursuing. They had sacrificed so much just to delay the god-slaying battleship for a moment. It was simply impossible to stop it. Was it worth it? At this moment, a divine light lit up the sky in the south. This divine light shot over like a shooting star. In just a few breaths of time, it arrived near the battlefield. Within the dazzling divine light was a majestic god-slaying battleship. The person operating the god-slaying battleship saw the ruins that spanned tens of thousands of miles. He also saw the corpses and debris scattered across the battlefield. He also saw the 100-odd survivors. Swish! The god-slaying battleship hurriedly slowed down and stopped in the sky. The god-slaying battleship's hatch opened. A group of guards escorting a god-emperor expert appeared in the sky. This majestic god-emperor expert was none other than the undying god-emperor. He expressionlessly arrived on the battlefield, looked around, then stared at the surviving god-kings and asked them what had happened. The god-kings were still in a state of shock. When they saw that the newcomer was one of their own and sensed the powerful aura of the undying god-emperor, they all bowed. Afterwards, several of the cleverer god-kings began to report what had happened to the undying god-emperor. Of course, before reporting, they did not forget to state their identities and origins to the undying god-emperor. They were doing this to claim credit. At the very least, the temple master would remember them and reward them according to their contributions in the future. When the undying god-emperor heard what had happened, he knew that he was not far from the Kenshin battleship. If he worked a little harder, he would be able to catch up. Naturally, he was in a great mood. After hearing how brutal the battle had been and how these god-kings had sacrificed so much, he immediately promised that the temple would reward them handsomely. Chapter 47-75. Originally, the surviving god-kings were in low spirits. Many of them felt that the price they had paid was not worth it. But after hearing the immortal god-emperor's promise, they felt relieved and their mood improved. Everyone bowed and thanked the immortal god-emperor. The immortal god-emperor did not linger. He turned around and returned to the godship, quickly leaving. Following that, the godship rushed north at full speed, hoping to catch up to Kenshin as soon as possible. The immortal god-emperor was the fastest. The distance between him and Ji Tianqing had also shrunk to about 1,000,000 miles. The other two temple masters followed behind. They were still 2,000,000 miles away from the immortal god-emperor. As for the other temple masters of the Taiyu Shrine, they were also chasing with all their might. But the distance was simply too great. They were separated by more than 10,000,000 miles. No matter how one looked at it, the immortal god-emperor had a huge advantage. He was also the one with the most hope of catching up to Ji Tianqing. After all, if Ji Tianqing wanted to reach the northern border of the Pantheon of Immortality, he still had to pass through 4 temple halls. The temple masters of the 4 temple halls were leading a group of elite god-kings towards the route designated by the immortal god-emperor to intercept the god-slayer warship. The White Dragon piloted the god-slayer warship and continued to fly north at full speed. Ji Tianqing returned to the distorted spacetime and went into seclusion to cultivate. He was at a critical juncture of his seclusion when he finally found an opportunity to condense Taoist rhymes. If not for the White Dragon's interruption, he would have already condensed the embryonic form of the 5th Taoist rhyme. Now that he had to continue his seclusion, he could only start all over again and work hard to condense the 5th Taoist rhyme. However, before he went into closed-door cultivation, Ji Tianqing understood one thing. If he did not control the God-Slayer warship and continued to let the White Dragon pilot it, the immortal God Emperor would soon catch up to them. In fact, the God-Slayer warship would even be intercepted by the God Kings of the other temple halls, wasting even more time. Therefore, before Ji Tianqing went into seclusion, he gave the White Dragon an order. Change direction and turn northeast. Don't leave the Pantheon of Immortality's territory for the time being. White Dragon was stunned when he heard the order. He couldn't believe that his master would make such a decision. He asked Ji Tianqing, "Shizuan, the people of the Pantheon of Immortality are searching for us everywhere. Isn't this even more dangerous?" Ji Tianqing shook his head and explained to White Dragon, "We had a big fight with those people before, so we left too many traces and wasted too much time. The Undying God Emperor will definitely be able to predict our path and arrange for people to intercept us. If he continued forward, he would only be intercepted by more people, and in the end, the Undying God Emperor would catch up. Changing directions at this time would catch them off guard. If they can't find us, they will gather a large number of troops at the border and wait for us. As the saying goes, it's dark under the lamp. The most dangerous place is the safest. The white dragon was suddenly enlightened. He quickly complied and went to carry out the order. Ji Tianqing returned to the distorted spacetime and continued to cultivate in seclusion to condense the fifth Taoist rhyme. The God-Slayer battleship quietly changed direction and headed northeast. The Undying God Emperor didn't expect this. The God-Slayer battleship headed north. The distance between the two quickly increased. 2 days later, the Undying God Emperor realized that something was wrong. Firstly, his God-Slayer battleship had already crossed half of the branch hull. The branch hull master and a group of elite God-Slayer battleship he had arranged didn't intercept the God-Slayer battleship on its original route. Secondly, he didn't see anything unusual in the escape route of the God-Slayer battleship. This caused the Undying God Emperor to feel extremely uneasy. As time passed, he became more and more uneasy. The situation doesn't look good. Logically speaking, I've been chasing him for 2 days. I should have caught up to him long ago. Why is he still nowhere to be seen? Could it be that he changed direction? Or did he use some kind of ultimate skill to increase the distance between us? The Undying God Emperor knew that the distance between him and Ji Tianqing was originally about 1 or 2 million kilometers. With his speed, he would definitely be able to catch up to him within 2 days. Since he couldn't catch up to him and couldn't see any trace of him, something must be wrong. However, he couldn't pinpoint where the problem was, nor did he think of a solution. Helpless, he could only order the God-Slayer battleship to continue forward and reach the northern border of his territory as soon as possible. The way he saw it, with so many branch hull masters and elite God-Slayer battleships searching for Kenshin everywhere, the Kenshin must be thinking of a way to escape the Pantheon of Immortality's territory. Rather than blindly searching everywhere and wasting time, it was better to rush to the northern border and set up an ambush and trap in advance. Of course, carrying out this plan of waiting for the rabbit to appear by the tree stump required even more manpower and resources. As the Undying God Emperor hurried along, he issued many orders. He mobilized dozens of branch hull masters and elite God-Slayer battleships to carry out the mission. The God-Slayer battleship rushed toward the northeast. It didn't reach its maximum speed, as it still needed to divert a portion of its strength to conceal its tracks and aura. This seemed dangerous, but it was actually very safe. At the very least, the God-Slayer battleship wouldn't encounter any danger for the next 20 days. Finally, under Ji Tianqing's instructions, the White Dragon stopped at the Origin Mountain branch. This branch was located in the northeast of the Pantheon of Immortality's territory. It was still one branch away from the border. If it continued to fly north for another 3 or 4 days, the God-Slayer battleship would be able to leave the Pantheon of Immortality and enter the unknown. However, the God-Slayer battleship hid in a mountain range with a circumference of millions of miles. This mountain range was extremely vast, with numerous mountains and forests. Countless mountain ranges stretched out, like giant dragons crawling on the ground. There were countless primitive forests in the mountain range, lush and verdant. There were very few people here. The God-Slayer battleship hid deep underground, quietly concealing itself. There were even aura concealing arrays set up around it. As long as no expert from the God Emperor came here, even if a group of God-Slayer battleships flew over the mountain peak, they wouldn't notice anything amiss. The White Dragon could finally rest. However, he still maintained his vigilance, guarding the surroundings. He didn't want to disappoint his master again. Ji Tianqing was still cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. He was at the crucial moment of condensing the fifth Taoist rhyme. The embryonic form of the Taoist rhyme had already been formed. He was currently fusing his insights into the heavenly Tao, as well as the divine Tao laws that he had absorbed from Lu Jiuyang and the god of the underworld. Time passed silently. The primitive mountain range was calm and peaceful. There were no changes. Another 10 days passed. Ji Tianqing cultivated in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for another year. He finally succeeded. The fifth Taoist rhyme was successfully condensed, and Ji Tianqing's strength also increased dramatically. He continued to cultivate for another 10 days before ending his closed-door cultivation. After he came out, he went to the God Slayer battleship's control room. The White Dragon had been cultivating. When he sensed his master's aura, he hurriedly stood up and bowed. Seeing that his master had successfully broken through a realm and his strength had increased greatly, the White Dragon was also very excited and hurriedly congratulated him. Then, he asked his master what their next step should be. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "A month has passed. The immortal God Emperor should have arrived at the northern border and set up traps and ambushes, right? If the people of the Taiyu Shrine are persistent enough, they should have heard the news and know what happened previously. I wonder if the two sects will meet at the northern border." Chapter 47-76. To Ji Tianqing, the greatest threats were the immortal God Emperor and the pantheon of immortality. However, he had far more enemies than these. The Taiyu Shrine's God Emperor also needed to be taken into consideration. He took a risk and hid in a mountain range not far from the border for a month. Using this opportunity, he successfully formed his fifth Taoist rhyme, greatly increasing his strength. A month's time was just right, within the range of his expectations and control. Not only would it give him ample time to improve his strength, but it would also give the Pantheon of Immortality and the Taiyu Shrine a chance to encounter each other. If it was possible, Ji Tianqing wanted the two shrines to fight each other, and he would be the fisherman who benefited from it. "Let's go," Ji Tianqing ordered. White Dragon steered the God Slayer out of the depths of the earth and into the air above the mountain. The formations within the warship were activated, concealing the warship's tracks and aura as it merged with the sky. White Dragon steered the God Slayer warship toward the north. Ji Tianqing sat in the pilot's cabin, quietly meditating. Half a month before this, a few interesting events had occurred. First, the immortal God Emperor arrived at the northern border. Later, the Temple Masters arrived one after another and joined the immortal God Emperor. Afterwards, the whole masters of the various branches led large groups of elite God Kings to the northern border one after another. Under the immortal God Emperor's command, they hurried to various designated locations and set up formations, traps, and ambushes with all their might. In the following days, an extremely long defensive line and an inescapable net were formed at the border. The immortal God Emperor and the Temple Masters spread out, each leading a large group of elite God Kings to search the border. They had thought that they would be able to find the God Slayer warship and capture Kenshin after half a month of waiting. But who would have thought that after 10 days, the people they waited for weren't Kenshin, but the Temple Masters of the Taiyu Shrine. Previously, Taiyu God Emperor had changed his mind at the last minute and headed north to hunt down the Kenshin instead of the imperishable shrine. On the way to the northern border, Taiyu God Emperor also noticed the problem and realized that Kenshin had successfully escaped. After all, he had chased all the way to the north without finding any traces of the God Emperor's great battle. This was enough to prove that the whole masters of the Pantheon of Immortality did not encounter the Kenshin, and the two sides did not fight. The answer was obvious. Kenshin must have escaped the pursuit of the Pantheon of Immortality. When the Taiyu Shrine was chasing after Kenshin, Kenshin had to change directions several times to shake off the Taiyu Shrine's experts. Taiyu God Emperor was well aware of Kenshin's methods and intelligence. Thus, Taiyu God Emperor knew that Kenshin must have used some sort of trick to escape, but there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't know how to find Kenshin, or where to go to capture Kenshin. The safest way was to head north to the Pantheon of Immortality and wait there. Alternatively, he could find the whole masters of the Pantheon of Immortality and see what they would do. Just like that, the Taiyu Shrine's whole masters made their way to the northern border. In a majestic mountain range, Taiyu God Emperor's airship ran into a group of people searching for Kenshin. The group was led by a Hull Master and had over 1,000 elite God Kings under his command. Aboard a divine airship, these God Kings were cruising around, searching for clues and traces. When they saw an unfamiliar warship approaching, the Hull Master and the God Kings were on high alert and immediately prepared for battle. When they saw the imprint of the Taiyu shrine on the warship, their killing intent soared and they launched an attack. The bastards of the Taiyu shrine are here. Kill them. In the past, the two shrines had been at peace with each other. It had been tens of thousands of years since a war had broken out. But this time was different. The Taiyu Shrine's Hull Masters had invaded the pantheon of immortality on a large scale and stirred up trouble in their territory. This had long since angered the immortal God Emperor. The immortal God Emperor had issued an order to not only capture Kenshin, but also kill the Taiyu Shrine's men. Thus, the warship launched an attack. Over 1,000 God Kings used their abilities and secret arts to surround and attack Taiyu God Emperor's airship. Taiyu God Emperor didn't think much of these God Kings. Even if they ran into each other, he couldn't be bothered to chase after them if they turned tail and fled. But these foes didn't know what was good for them and had taken the initiative to attack. How could Taiyu God Emperor allow them to do as they pleased? Without any hesitation, Taiyu God Emperor's airship launched a counterattack. The two warships fired their divine cannons and fired several hundred beams of divine power that clashed in the air. Bang! 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 With deafening booms, the several hundred beams of divine power shattered, filling the sky with fragments of divine light. Tens of thousands of fragments of divine light were swept up by the violent shockwaves and spread out in a five-colored ripple that spread for tens of thousands of miles. The explosions traveled far and wide, reverberating through the heavens and earth. The beams of divine power fired by the Lord-class warship were all shattered. Meanwhile, 90% of the beams fired by Taiyu God Emperor's Imperial warship were still intact, and all of them struck the Lord-class warship. The result was indisputable. The Lord-class warship's divine power barrier was shattered, and several dozen craters and large cracks appeared on its surface. The terrifying shockwaves pushed the Lord-class warship several hundred miles away and smashed it into a towering mountain. The mountain was smashed into pieces and collapsed with a rumbling noise. Dust flew everywhere, and the earth shook violently. The damaged warship flickered with divine light as it tried to charge out of the ruins and escape. But then, Taiyu God Emperor's airship fired again, firing several hundred more beams of divine power. Boom! 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 The next moment, several hundred beams of divine power slammed into the ruins, causing another earth-shattering explosion in endless dust. The heavily damaged Lord-class warship could no longer withstand the bombardment of the divine cannons. It shattered on the spot, sending countless fragments and wreckage flying everywhere. Several dozen unlucky elite God Kings were killed on the spot. Most of the 900 or so elite God Kings who had survived were heavily injured. Under the leadership of the Hull Master, they quickly fled the wreckage of the warship and charged out of the ruins. After witnessing the enemy's power, they lost the will to fight and no longer dared to attack. They hurriedly turned and fled. Of course, in order to escape successfully, they split into 3 different directions and scattered. Even though Taiyu God Emperor's airship gave chase, it couldn't capture them all in one fell swoop. It only killed 300 or so elite God Kings before ending the pursuit. This matter was over. This was originally just a small interlude that didn't affect the big picture. However, the 600 or so elite divine kings who had managed to escape hurriedly sent out messages to the immortal God Emperor and the Hull Masters in their joy at surviving the calamity. In less than 15 minutes, the immortal God Emperor and the Hull Masters learned that the people of the Taiyu Shrine had arrived. Chapter 47-77. The immortal God Emperor hated the Taiyu Shrine to the core. His hatred for them was second only to that of Kenshin. Learning that the Taiyu shrine had arrived, the immortal God Emperor's expression darkened, his eyes blazing with fury. You've gone too far. Not only did you barge into my territory to stir up trouble, you even dared to chase me all the way here. You're looking down on me. Taiyu old man, I'll make sure you pay the price this time. The immortal God Emperor clenched his fists and ordered the other temple lords to meet the Taiyu God Emperor. As for capturing Kenshin, he could only put it aside for the time being. In any case, the border defenses were still there, and the temple lords and elite god kings were still on their missions, searching everywhere for Kenshin. It wasn't a bad strategy to deal with the Taiyu shrine first and then deal with the Kenshin later. Half a day later, the immortal God Emperor summoned the 4 temple lords and led 5,000 elite god kings to the scene of the incident. Of course, they knew that the Taiyu God Emperor had already left the scene. But the immortal God Emperor believed that the Taiyu God Emperor was still nearby. As expected, the immortal God Emperor and the 4 temple lords arrived at the scene of the incident and began searching the area. A day later, the immortal God Emperor encountered the Taiyu shrine's warship. 2 temple lords were with the immortal God Emperor. The Taiyu shrine also had 2 warships, the Taiyu God Emperor and the 6th temple lord. The 4th and 5th temple lords had yet to recover from their injuries and were still recovering in the Taiyu God Emperor's warship. The 2nd and 3rd temple lords traveled together, searching for Kenshin's tracks and clues tens of millions of kilometers away. The 2 sides met and faced each other in the sky. The undying God Emperor's side had the advantage in numbers. The 3 warships were arranged in a battle formation, and their momentum was overbearing. The great universe God Emperor's side only had 2 warships and 2,000 elite god kings. Their numbers were small. However, Taiyu God Emperor was strong and confident. He wasn't afraid at all. The 2 God Emperors sent out messages to gather the other palace masters. They wanted to gather all of their forces and destroy the other party. Without sufficient confidence, both sides would not attack with all their might. Both sides had reserved their trump cards. Even after the 2 sides had confronted each other for a while, they had begun to attack and defend, but most of them were probing attacks. The 5 battleships circled around in the sky, shooting out dazzling beams of divine power that locked onto the enemy's battleships. The 2 sides exchanged blows back and forth. Loud sounds of battle shook the heavens, and divine light covered the sky and covered the sun. On the surface, it looked very lively, as if the battle was very intense. But in reality, both sides were probing and dodging, so they didn't cause too much damage to each other. After an hour of fighting, only a few of the warship's divine power barriers had been broken. 3 of them had been blasted into holes and cracks. The elite god kings in the warships didn't suffer any casualties. Emperor God Taiyu wasn't satisfied with the outcome, but he was also worried. He could see that the undying God Emperor was stalling for time, waiting for reinforcements to arrive before attacking with all his might. He couldn't delay any longer. The 2nd and 3rd palace masters were tens of millions of kilometers away, and it would take them at least 2 hours to arrive. With less than an hour left, his reinforcements wouldn't arrive. If the undying God Emperor's reinforcements arrived, things would be very bad. Thus, Taiyu God Emperor decisively ordered a retreat. Both he and the 6th palace master's warships fought and retreated toward the northwest. The 2nd and 3rd palace masters were in the northwest, rushing over with all their might. Only by rushing in both directions could they meet up in the shortest time possible. Seeing Taiyu God Emperor fleeing, the undying God Emperor naturally wouldn't let him go and gave chase with all his might. In any case, the other 2 palace masters would arrive soon. All he needed to do was delay Taiyu God Emperor so that he could surround him and win with numbers. Just like that, the 2 sides clashed high in the sky, constantly shifting battlefields. Half an hour later, the 2 sides had moved millions of kilometers away, leaving behind countless ruins, collapsed mountains, and destroyed forests. Taiyu God Emperor couldn't shake off the undying God Emperor's entanglement, and both sides' warship suffered varying degrees of damage. It was at this point that the two Pantheon of Immortality caught up. The undying God Emperor and the four Palace Masters had gathered. 5 warships arranged themselves in a formation, surrounding Taiyu God Emperor and the 6th Palace Master. The Pantheon of Immortality's side had a great boost in morale, while Taiyu God Emperor's side was filled with worry. In order to fend off the Pantheon of Immortality's encirclement, Taiyu God Emperor, who had yet to personally take action, had no choice but to use all sorts of abilities. Countless streaks of divine light danced in the sky, intertwining with each other and exploding with deafening booms. Taiyu God Emperor's abilities successfully neutralized the enemy's attack, protecting his and the 6th Palace Master's warship. Seeing this, the undying God Emperor led the 4 Palace Masters into action, using their trump cards to surround Taiyu God Emperor and the 6th Palace Master. Soon after, the situation on the battlefield changed. The 5 God Emperor experts on the Pantheon of Immortality's side worked together to surround Taiyu God Emperor and the 6th Palace Master. The 5 warships also formed an encirclement and attacked the 2 enemy warships with all their might. The elite God Kings in the various warships also charged out of their ships and lined up in the sky to fight each other. Even though Emperor God Taiyu was very strong, he couldn't take on so many enemies at once. He was forced to retreat again and again. The 6th Palace Master was even more unlucky. He was the weaker one to begin with, and now that he was surrounded by multiple God Emperor experts, he was soon beaten into a sorry state and covered in wounds. The battle quickly became one-sided. Taiyu God Emperor's side was completely suppressed. The 2,000 elite God Kings under his command suffered a large number of casualties. More and more people died in battle. It seemed like the scales of victory were tipping in favor of the Pantheon of Immortality. In at most an hour, Taiyu God Emperor's side would suffer a crushing defeat. His 2,000 God Kings and the 6th Palace Master would all be killed. Only Taiyu God Emperor would be able to escape with his life after suffering grievous injuries. However, it was at this moment that Taiyu God Emperor's reinforcements arrived. 2 divine warships came from the northwest like shooting stars, whistling through the air. The masters of the 2 warships were the 2nd and 3rd Palace Masters of the Taiyu Shrine. There were also 1,000 God Kings on each ship. After the 2 Palace Masters arrived at the battlefield, they joined the battle without saying a word. With the help of these 2 powerhouses, Taiyu God Emperor and the 6th Palace Master felt much less pressure and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. This was especially so for the 6th Palace Master, who was heavily injured and covered in blood. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Even though the Taiyu Shrine side only had 4 God Emperor experts, they still didn't have the advantage in numbers. However, Taiyu God Emperor was stronger. With the help of the 2nd and 3rd Palace Masters, he quickly turned the situation around. The 2 sides were evenly matched and gradually reached a stalemate. Thus, Taiyu God Emperor took the initiative to call a truce and negotiate with the immortal God Emperor. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.